We have no sound.
Meredith?
Yep, now we can hear you. Thank you.
Can you hear us now? Has to be blue.
Okay, just, can you speak, Mark? Can we?
Yeah, Meredith, Diamond, can you hear us or anybody else online?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yes,
Okay.
we can hear you.
Perfect.
Great, thank you. So we have one agenda adjustment, which is adding the Maine Power Solutions Constellation Fixed Price Electrical Contract as item 8E. So I would motion to add that as 8E. Is there a second?
I will second.
Any other comments, questions, or adjustments? We'll go ahead and vote. All those in favor of adding that item? Opposed? Abstain? Did I miss your vote? Okay, so it looks like passed 5-0. Warrants. So I would make a motion to approve payroll warrant 20, purse March warrant, regular warrant 20, and oh, I forgot the minutes. I told you. We'll get back to the minutes. And continuing the motion, bond warrant 55. Is there a second?
I will second.
Any discussion on the warrants? All those in favor of approving? Okay, back to the minutes. I would make a motion to approve the minutes of March 22nd, 2022 as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion, comments, or corrections?
I have a question. Just learning what minutes are and stuff. I noticed that there's a lot of there's notes on what on the muse block on what was presented and what the community said, but nothing on like our discussion from the board or our perspective. And is that how it should be, or is that I feel like they're very different perspectives?
Typically, we don't try, there's different philosophies on minutes, but typically we don't try and capture the board because the whole thing's recorded.
Okay.
And so the intention of this is a legal document. And so the one thing we have to do is record the motion and the votes on the motions. Typically, we try and do a very, very brief capture of all the public comment, just as entering into the record that a public comment was made. But we don't typically try and capture the whole back and forth discussion by the board, because otherwise you end up with 10 pages of minutes. And it's also very hard for Rachel to accurately represent what we thought. So we do, post online the full recording. So that's kind of where it's not intended to capture the discussion. It's really intended to capture the legal record. So, yep. Okay, so any other questions or comments on the minutes? Go ahead and vote. All those in favor of approving the minutes? Next up, we have public comment. The floor is open for public comment. Not seeing anybody unmuting. I'll just give it a couple more seconds. Okay, don't see any public comment. We'll have another period at the end of the meeting. Next up is acknowledgements. Jake?
Nothing at this time.
I'd just like to recognize the show choirs. Middle school won a silver medal and 2 individual awards, and the high school won a gold medal, top score in the state, and 2 individual awards as well. So that was exciting. Any other acknowledgements, Kevin?
I don't have anything to report.
No? Mark?
I have nothing this time. Thank you.
Meredith?
You took mine, so I just second yours.
Okay. Next up, we have reports. We'll start with principal reports. Kristen?
Hi, everyone. Great. It's so sunny. It's so nice. It seems crazy to be here at the board meeting. It's so light out. I love it. It's awesome. So yeah, it's been a great few weeks since we last chatted. It's been busy at ASA. March is always crazy busy time, I guess. So we had our ASA students who are part of Mr. Caballero's Strings group, they did a recital at Minsky Hall, and I heard really fantastic things about it. Our 4th grade students went to visit the Hudson Museum, and they came back and they just loved it. It was awesome. As a school, we continue to work our way through Charlotte's Web. We've had some pretty exciting things going on. Wilbur, we have a stuffed pig, Wilbur, who goes and visits, and they love getting the names drawn. And we do that every few days. And currently we're reading chapter 7 and 8. And actually, I think that was last week. We're on to 9 and 10 now, but we're doing door decorating, and we're going to do a parade around ASA on Thursday so that everybody can see all the different doors. So that is lots of fun. It looks very festive at ASA. Let's see what else. Oh, talking about show choirs. I know the ASA show choir, I heard it was fantastic. They performed 5 choreographed numbers. And we want to thank everybody that took the time to make that happen. I know we had a lot of high school friends that came and helped our ASA students, and they really looked up to them. It's such a great collaboration between the schools. So Foolish Friday, April Fools, was funny at ASA. We had a dinosaur, a Hugosaurus, actually greet the kids in the morning, and a bunch of us switched up and did different classrooms. So when the kiddos came into their classrooms, it wasn't necessarily their teacher that they saw. I happened to be in Ms. Marakis's room, and she had written on the board that she was going to be gone for the next couple weeks and that I'd take care of everything. And so it was funny. They were like looking at me like, oh, great. We get Mrs. Briggs. So that was really fun. So that was Friday. Our PTO continues to do lots of incredible things for us. They're doing a fundraiser at Taquerita in Orono on April 12th. And then on May 20th, they're doing a fundraiser at Sweet Frog. These are wonderful. We thank those businesses for all of that. And they're also, the PTO is working on the ASA memory book, which is such a wonderful thing to have. And I know that kids really look forward to seeing that every year. And the best part about that is that the PTO covers the cost for books for everybody, for all the kids. And it's so great. And so we appreciate everybody that helps out with the fundraising efforts. We appreciate the community, and we appreciate the families as well. We had our open house for incoming pre-K and kindergarten students, just a little, just if they wanted to come, they could pick up all of the things to register their child as well. We had quite a few families go through. Mrs. Earhart and I took pre-K, she took kindergarten. We got to show them all the amazing things that ASA has to offer. It was so much fun. It was great. And we had a few kiddos that were like, do we start school now? Can we start today? It was just so cute. It's exciting. It's an exciting time for families and for teachers and principals as well. On March 18th, we engaged in our professional development efforts. That was fantastic. It was great to just to get all of us together and have these conversations, which aren't always easy, but to have them and bring them to the front it was awesome. Very exciting. Our trimester ended on March 11th. Report cards went home on the 21st. And I think we're going to start working on NWEAs next month. So the month of May is very busy as well. So that's all I have for tonight.
Great, thank you. Any questions or comments? We'll go on to the middle school. Richard.
Hi, everyone. Lots of good stuff going on at OMS this past month or so. And I want to shout out to Mrs. Bishop for earning I have to read from my paper here on this one, the 2021 Glenn Nurbach Award for Excellence in Teaching Social Studies. And so congratulations to Mrs. Bishop for that recognition recently. And thanks for the shout out, Brian, for our jazz band and our show choir. We put a nice picture in our parent newsletter, and so music programs are doing great. Jazz band with the silver award, and spring math meet we have coming up on Wednesday tomorrow. And the results from the winter math meet, we had OMS is tied for first place team overall with Reedsbrook. Always a friendly competition with our friends at Reedsbrook on the math meet. So tied for first place. And so the spring meet on Wednesday. see how that goes. And the OMS Art Enrichment Program, we kicked off on March 30, and that involved students were able to sign up for that and do a special art enrichment project. And that was a collaboration between Katie Quirk and Julie Anthony. And some of the paintings were amazing. We're going to get some of them up around the school, and they should really look sharp when we get some of those up. So, and then we have another one scheduled for May with another art enrichment program coming up in May. And then we're down the road in that time of year where we're looking at strongly our upcoming early release plan is to look at student groupings, preliminary work on the schedule for next year. Now that we know some of the moving parts, they're starting to settle in, and we're continuing our discussion on acceleration options for students in English language arts. So those are kind of the next year planning things that are going on at OMS. And the science assessment, the MEA science assessment is back this year. Last year was a pilot year. And so this year we're back to getting science test results. So look forward to our 8th grade participating in that assessment in May. And then just like Kristen, we have our NWA spring schedule. It's published. I think I included it in the board report, and that's the week of May 23rd. So, and athletics are underway, track and field, and began this week, and full game meet schedule begins right after April vacation. So lots going on at OMS.
Great, thank you. Any questions or comments? No, okay, we'll go ahead and move on to the high school.
So I'll go first, Meredith, if you want. Just like all of you have been saying, it's really been an exciting, fun time at OHS as well, along with our show choir, which thanks for stating that in the beginning there, Brian, but also our jazz band. We have a lot of other celebrations that have happened. Ruth White recently received a 3rd place finish in the chemistry and materials category for her project in the Maine State Science Fair. Her project was on biodegradable and locally sourced bandages. She's just amazing. So congratulations to her. Our OTO hockey player, Tyler Kenny, was also selected for the North and South Senior Hockey All-Star Game, which with the competitive athletes involved in hockey this year, that was definitely an honor. So congratulations to him. Tommy Owen won the 2022 Maine High School Individual Chess Championship, and the chess team overall won the 3rd consecutive state title. So congratulations to Matthew Terrell and Tommy and our other athletes, or competitors, I'm sorry, in that event. And congratulations to Jeremy Marks and Riley Murray. They are both 2 of our outstanding UTC students who participated in the Skills USA competition. Jeremy earned 2nd place with his interactive app and game design, and Riley earned 2nd place also with the TV production. So both of them, that way to go. It's a lot of hard work there. And also to add to that, our Winter Carnival week, which was something that was really, really enjoyed by our entire school community. It was really remarkable. Miss Emerson and Mrs. Clark worked really hard with our student council and many others to put on a fantastic week, which included dress-up days, included minute to win it games, included a senior versus staff basketball game, which I even attempted to play, but just basically ran up and down the court. The dance, which was the first in the last 2 years, was outstanding. It was highly attended by students. And I just have to say, masks were still mandatory at that time, and the students handled that very well and really handled coming together in a crowd like that remarkably well, and just all seemed to have a really good time and interact very well together, which I know isn't always the case in a lot of high school dances. So I, again, was proud of our student body. And additionally to being proud, we are looking forward to our awards end of years coming up, and our student award review committee, which I am helping out with, has now met twice. And we are really looking at our student of the month nominations and the process and criteria that's used for that, as well as we're looking at our annual book awards that are given at the end of the year. And how we select students for those and choose who wins those each year. And we're going to bring the feedback to this to staff, and then pilot our ideas the end of this year, and then readjust again next year to keep moving forward, to making sure that we are honoring our students in the best ways possible. And as far as our collaborations with families, we're looking forward to our next parent advisory group, which is coming up this next Tuesday, April 2nd, from 6 to 7. So the link is available in our weekend preview, but also if anyone needs it, they can just notify us and we can send it to them individually. And I also just want to say a huge thanks and shout out to, as we continue to see our building come to fruition, all the work that's been going on for the last few years, our Performing Arts Center, as many as mentioned earlier, is really getting close. It looks amazing. Pictures people have posted, people have had the opportunity to go in and visit. The students are getting extremely excited. Staff are getting extremely excited. And we're able to hold at the end of this year both the Scenes and Songs production that our students put on with Cami Carter and Daniel, and I think John as well as we're going to hold our senior night or baccalaureate there this year, which will be really nice. So we're all just looking forward to seeing that open up and starting to use it in the ways that we've envisioned for so long. So thanks to everybody who's been a part of that, because I know it's been a long process. And I do have to say, I've made some good friends at some of the work crew. And so when they finally do leave, it's going to be sad goodbye for them. But thank you to all of them too, because they've worked really hard.
Thanks, Sam. In the spirit of the year ending and looking ahead to next year beginning, there has been a lot of work that we are engaging in an effort to take stock of areas in which we could be doing better by students and coming up with a path forward toward actualizing what we see as potential improvements. Much of our building specific time on March 18th was directed in that spirit. We had department specific discussions in health, world language, math, social studies, and English. And science. The questions that departments were grappling with varied depending on how the year has gone and needs that have been identified. But it feels really good to be transitioning out of this time of pandemic-driven reaction to circumstance and toward a place where we are thinking deliberately about what our goals are and how to get there. We have been
putting our head in
we have been thinking ahead to the revised schedule plan, and we have Troy Wagstaff and Holly Gunn and Heidi Clark have been working really hard to ensure that we are putting together the map for courses for next year that serves as many students as well as possible. I had no idea how complicated this was until I started looking at some of the matrices that our school counselors are generating, and the hours and hours and hours that are going into this really are, in that spirit of making sure that our students can access everything that they want to access with as few barriers as possible. So we are working on nailing down the last few pieces of that, and Troy, I believe, anticipates running our first versions of what the schedule might be for students shortly after April break. In addition, school counselors met with every student for whom the move from 9 blocks to 8 blocks would have an impact on their course request for next year. And those conversations generated revisions that were in the best possible place for students for next year. We are looking ahead next week to the culmination of our years-long investment in our NIAS self-reflection process. This is a mirror that we are holding up for ourselves, and that the visiting team will hold up for us when they come next week. They'll be on campus Monday and Tuesday, visiting classrooms, meeting with folks, calibrating our self-reflection alongside the reality that they observe, and then giving us feedback on our proposed priority areas for the next 2 years. Between now and the spring of 2024, we will work on growing in the directions that we have identified as needing it the most. And I hope that I speak for the self-reflection writing committee when I say that we've done a really thorough job of digging into the corners, all of the corners of our work in an effort to make sure that we are growing in the ways that we most need to grow. And Margie Innes, Jen Branchflower, and Jay Hubbard have been really instrumental in getting us ready for our visit on Monday and Tuesday. And the last part of my report that I will touch on is a follow-up from a previous discussion about class sizes, specifically in the English department. Mark, you had requested some more information on this topic. And so I've broken down, as you can see in the report, the numbers specifically for the English department distribution. You can see that we have 13 classes that have between 15 and 19 students. 10 classes that have between 10 and 14 students, and 4 classes that are 9 or fewer enrolled. This year, because of the pandemic, we ran 5 sections of English 109, which is our credit recovery English class for students who failed to pass either English 9 or expository writing. And those class sizes by design are very, very small. The 2 sections we have running this semester, we had 3 first semester, 2 this semester. Those are enrollments of 5 and 3. We have 1 class of English 9 that is at 8 students, and that really is a circumstance of scheduling. Other sections of English 9 have absorbed what would be the enrollment that was assigned to that section, and then a class of world literature of 8. But other than that, our English classes are more in step with class size distribution in other departments. So I hope that addresses your questions, Mark. And if you would like any more information, just let me know.
Where are those documents?
In the folder, and then in the principal report section.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, move on to superintendent's report.
I have a few items to report on, separate from the rest of our agenda. First of all, I want to report that we have received, since we last met, 2 resignations from staff for the upcoming year. And these are both instructional staff positions, so I've accepted these resignations as policy allows for, but just policy also requires public report of these. So first, Karen Fry, who is a high school special education teacher, has resigned, and we wish her well on her future path. And Danelle Farrell, special education teacher at ASA, has also resigned, and similarly, we wish her well in her next path. Both of these positions, as I said, are in special education. Following tonight, Lisa Smith will work with Rachel to get positions advertised and posted for getting the ball rolling on the hiring process for these positions. Also, we're speaking of advertising, we're in the process of application review for the ASA principal vacancy and the director of learning vacancy. Currently, the interview committees are reviewing the applications and providing feedback. We plan to run the ASA principal interviews first. We're kind of down to the wire with April vacation coming up. So I just made the decision we could not do both before April vacation. So my goal is to have the ASA principal interviews start Friday and hopefully finish Monday, and then have the stakeholder Q&A sessions that we have with staff and then with parents, community members happen later next week, with the goal of being able to bring you a recommendation when we meet next on the 26th, I think. And then right after April vacation, we plan to commence with interviews for the director of learning position, and then we'll carry the process out similarly and bring that back to you, that recommendation to you on May 10th. I wish I could get them both in before the next meeting. I just don't think that's realistic. So that's our time frame, and I feel like we got good interest, especially in the principal position. if we got quality interest, I'd say the numbers aren't as high in the director of learning, but I think that's not a certification that as many people hold also. So I feel good about the polls, but we'll see, through the process. It always is an enlightening process to go through. So we will report back to you May 26th with those findings, but I'll also, the board is encouraged to attend the stakeholder sessions, even if you're not on the interview team. And, I think you have, I don't think I've told the board about the dates for that. So I'll make sure that, actually I'm getting that out to the school community later this week about the ASA one, so that people can begin to save the date on that. Finally, we have advertised for student board reps. We had an application process. The deadline is tomorrow. So far, we've not received applications, but I'm hoping they're just working on getting that in. So if anyone's hearing this, I know Ms. Goodall and the social studies team have been trying to talk it up with the students, and it's been in this week in preview. But if you know of some who are interested, including the people on the call, please encourage them to get that in. And what we typically do is after we get those in, Brian and I meet with candidates, and we'll try to get them seated as soon as possible. But first we need some applicants. So the process is underway, and as soon as we can get someone seated, they begin attending meetings with us. Everything else is coming up on the agenda unless you have other questions.
Any questions or comments on the superintendent report?
I assume those 2 resignations are effective at the end of the school year, not immediate.
Yes, good question. Yes.
Thank you.
Anything else? Next up, we move to discussion items. COVID discussion. Do you have anything?
I don't have anything. It's our standing agenda item, so
I
I just
know.
leave it there, but I really
Knock
don't
on
have
wood.
anything. I sent out the, another frustrating week with pool testing. We've had that happen once before, and it was not just us last week. So we hope for.
Say that they happen with other districts other than us last week.
Yes, I think it happened, well, I don't know if it happened beyond our region.
Yeah.
I just know there are a couple of other schools that are on our route that this happened to. So something happened, I think, in transit with some of our pools across this route. It was just strange that one batch got there and the rest didn't, but that's really what happened before, as I recall as well. Some made it, some didn't. So, but we persevere. Today was another test day. So hopefully the company they sent a very apologetic email, so they're aware of the flaw and are working to address it.
I mean, overall, you have to be grateful to the state for making this opportunity available. I don't know that many states have actually done that. So,
Right.
I
think
mean,
it's
they
great.
screwed up last week, or the company did, but overall, I think it has to be a pretty winning program people get credit for.
Absolutely. And they've committed to doing it as long as the money lasts, which they say it should last through the end of the year. We're hopeful it does. And what we found last year when we were trying to research options on our own, and maybe there are more options that emerged since we were looking for options last school year. We just couldn't get anyone to even answer our calls because we were such a small entity. It probably wasn't worth their while to entertain us as clients at that point when they were dealing with large universities and larger companies. So it's helpful to have the state really doing this on our behalf, because it was hard for the little districts and organizations probably to get this kind of program up and running. So it's been great.
Any other questions or comments on the topic of COVID? All right, knock on wood, our shortest conversation in 2 years. So
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll have another conversation that's longer than that at some point in time, but we'll take it while it happens. Next up, board self-evaluation reflection. Just for people in the audience and for new board members, this is something that's, well, it's a best practice. In some states, it's required by law for school boards to do an annual self-evaluation. It's not required in the state of Maine, but we have a policy requiring the board to do a self-evaluation. So here we are. It's a little later in the year than usual, but so first step is we send out a survey to mostly it's the parent community and the teacher staff community that fill it out. We had one student this year. Some years we had 5 or 10 students. And sometimes we get community members who aren't directly tied to the schools, which is great too. I gave the board a summary. This document is not sanitized. It mentions specific employees and specific students, or at least identifiability of particular students or parents. So we would have to pay a lawyer to sanitize this to make it a public document, but the board has a copy. I'm happy to, if somebody has questions, I'm happy to share specifics, summary data or anything like that. So we basically have moved to, we used to use, there's a National School Board Association set of criteria, but we found those were fairly technical and didn't connect with our community or even sometimes with the teachers in terms of understanding what they were getting at. So we now pretty much just survey based on the things on the left side of our agenda, which, to recap, we have the student growth and achievement values, which were set up through a all stakeholder process, really, I guess, right when Meredith was getting here. So, but Meredith was part of that process as like the core values of the district. One of the best practices for a school board is to have a mission and vision around student growth and achievement, and this is ours. We have ongoing board responsibilities. That's hopefully helpful to us and to the community to know about what the board thinks our regular job is. And then we have, it says board goals. Sometimes these are more district goals or charges to the district. But these are things that are set every year. And, one of the things I hope that comes out of this process is that people who are watching realize that those goals that are set actually do matter and we do actually follow through on them. And so I would encourage people. We've had disappointing amount of input on those goals in the past, but I would encourage people to recognize that that's kind of become an organizing principle for the board and to a lesser degree the district. And if you think there are too many, if you think they're too few, if you think they're the wrong ones, please come to our workshop where we set these up for next year. We haven't scheduled it, but typically it's either the last board meeting in May or the first board meeting in June. We'll have a workshop before the board meeting, which is an informal conversation. The board will talk things through to try and combine items and winnow it down. And then we'll take a final vote at the last meeting in June on those goals. So if I have one message for the people listening, it's, we want input to those goals, but those goals actually do turn into an agenda of work for the district for the year. So please take those seriously. I think we're going to divide the board self-evaluation tonight into two parts. One is a quick reflection, again, staying out of the individual details of what popped out for us in the survey. And then I also wanted to just do a quick walkthrough. We get this MESBA check sheet and just do a quick walkthrough, maybe on the code of ethics and maybe the board meeting and evaluation questions to just check in and see how we're doing. Those, I imagine, might be more of a conversation. The survey reflection, I think, is really just going to be around the room comment. And, I know Kevin and Noah, you both weren't here for the whole last year, so you're welcome to, chime in if you saw something or to pass if you want to. But again, really quick overview. I think it's fair to say that of all the institutions we survey, the board remains the least popular. In some ways, that's not a surprise. It's not our job to be popular, but we aim to do better. And I do think, so the flip side of that message is I think this is the highest rating the board has had since we started this practice about 5 years ago. So you can take that for what you want. On the student growth and achievement values, by and large, both the teachers and the staff rated us fairly highly, meaning a 5.5 to a 6. I guess you'd like to see a 7 every time, but I don't know if that's realistic. But it stands out to me, and I think this is a consistent pattern. That probably the one we score the lowest on, and more with the teachers than the community, is the meet each student where they're at and move them forward. We typically score the best on supporting the whole student. And the learning mindset is somewhere in between. So I think that's a note. I make that note and feed that forward into our goal setting for the next year. There were a couple comments about board civility, which I think is a fair enough point. I do think our community, whether they're staff or parents, should have a high expectation for board civility. That said, last year was a tough year, and A lot of boards ended up in shouting matches. That's a low bar. I don't want to, claim victory because we didn't end up in shouting matches, but I also hope, I guess I'm just saying, I hope that last year was a unique year and we're, we have some turnover in board members, and I hope this year is a new year going forward and we can completely meet the expectation around board civility. Some other notes I had. So on the fundamental responsibilities, I don't think I had anything that jumped out at me about that, except just to note that a lot of people I think don't particularly either don't know what the board does or just don't even pay much attention to a lot of these functions like policies, curriculum processes. I think probably of them all, the curriculum process is what we were rated lowest on. So I take that as a note. Again, going into goals, whether that's a communication issue or an actual issue. I just wanted to quickly, I'm going to recap my take of how we did on each of the 6 specific goals, and then I will shut up and like to hear from other people. So manage the COVID response at both the social, emotional, academic, and physical well-being of students and staff. It was a tough year. Overall, I thought there was a pretty deep appreciation for the job that the administration and the board and the staff and the students all did. I think I heard in the survey, especially from the staff, there's still a lot of COVID fatigue, not in the medical sense, but just in the psychological sense around, and that it's true. And I think that's real, and we need to keep that in mind for the board. But overall, COVID is not going away, but I hope we're in a new place. We'll see. And overall, I think the feedback was largely positive, and to the extent it wasn't, it came from both sides, which I take as a metric of success to some degree. Continuing the construction efforts, by and large, fairly high ranking on that. Somewhat lower, which I think is a recognition that they're in the building and seeing not just the new construction, but the fact that we have lots of maintenance to roll through the buildings over the next 5 years, which I think is fair. Conduct a meaningful DEI audit resulting in an action plan for the district. Just to note, we've done the audit. We have a group forming the action plan. There is not a public action plan yet, but that's a goal that I think is still meetable and intended to be met by the end of the year. I think the teachers probably ranked us higher on that one just because they've seen more of the progress than the public has. But certainly, delivering the action plan is the key point there, and that hasn't happened yet, but I think we're still on target for that. Engage community staff in development of a shared vision of best use of technology in our schools. I'll just be honest, I think that's the one. I know the technology committee's done a lot of work on that, but it hasn't necessarily gotten rolled out on a wider basis. I think that's just if there's a victim in these goals of COVID, that's probably the victim of the goals. Not to mention COVID is completely changing our relationship to technology. Doesn't take away some of the initial concerns about best practices of using technology and excessive use or inappropriate use of technology, but it also has changed the conversation. So I don't want to presage where we end up with goals, but I don't think that one's fully checked off. I can imagine that coming back in some form. Assess the high school schedule and alternatives so as to best fit district needs and values. We've talked a lot about that. I know that decision probably annoyed more people than it made happy. But the one thing I will defend about that is the process. It was a fairly deep and wide and extensive process and discussion. At this point, the changes have happened, and I think my own opinion is we give it a try for a year and see how it goes. Put renewed effort into recruiting tuition students at OHS to capitalize on novel opportunities. I think we had a great recruiting year given the class sizes out there, and so kudos to the high school team for that. I will briefly note we had a comment from several people saying, how come 2 of the goals were related to the high school, which I think is a fair point. I would note that both of those goals, the bell schedule and the tuition students, have a pretty large impact across the whole district. It's not between the budget and the bell schedule. They do ripple through the whole district. I also would note that some of the teachers at the high school said, how come you had 2 goals specifically focused on the high school, right? So it's kind of a blessing and a curse, I think, to have these foci. So, bring your feedback to the goals for next time. If you think they're ACES specific goals or OMS specific goals, bring those. Facilities, I just wanted to quickly give an update. We do this at the facilities report at the end, but there are a couple of comments. We know about the lack of drainage in the back. That's something still being worked on. The auditorium's about to be turned over in a matter of, I'll say within 4 weeks to be safe. We're about to launch into a bunch of self-managed projects that are done more locally and not through a big contractor. You'll hear more about that in the next agenda item. What was the other point that came up? We are still committed, as far as I know. The board hasn't discussed it explicitly, but we will tonight in the budget, to this idea that we need to continue to spend on cleaning, painting and ceilings and lights in rooms across the facilities. Many of our buildings haven't been touched in 40 years. So we're aware of that need, and that's still ongoing. And I'm blanking. There was one more comment just about that it would have been helpful to communicate. If I remember on the facilities, I'll do that. So I'll stop there. Who would like to hear from any other board members on their impressions from the survey? Will you just go around the room, or if somebody wants to jump in, go ahead.
I can start, I guess. I mean, I always find this process helpful to hear what various community groups think about board goings on over the last year. So I think you're right, Brian, that it's out of all the surveys we do, ours is usually at the bottom in terms of respondent satisfaction, and that we haven't done the other ones yet, but I suspect that'll be true again this year. So I think for me, it's always a useful process to hear what people think and to kind of try and take that into account and look back, as I look back over the last year and then look forward to the next year. I do think that COVID obviously ate up the bulk of our time, as it did for pretty much anybody in a lot of different areas, not just schools, but in a lot of areas. And so maybe for some things that some people think might have gotten short shrift that were not COVID related, I'm not offering that as an excuse, but it's something to keep in mind. Hopefully we'll need to devote less attention to COVID next year, and we can maybe devote more attention to some other things. But I just think that for me, the most useful part of this is when we sit down, as you said, in May or June to think about goals for the next year, I use this to frame my thinking on that. So I'm glad that people take the time to respond to it every year. I find that very helpful. And I would echo your comment that we do try and meet these goals, right? We try and we use them to frame what we do over the course of the year. The feedback on the survey retrospectively is helpful, but we don't really have much participation in that goal setting process. So if people were interested in that, coming to that workshop isn't a huge investment of time. And then that would be useful for us too. So other than that, I think your summary more or less covers my reaction to the survey results. So I'll stop there.
I'll go. I'm glad we do this every year, despite the fact that we don't have to legally. I think it's good to see how we are perceived, because our internal perception of our interactions may be different than what people are seeing from the outside, and it's always good to see that. Doing this every year kind of gives us the opportunity to refocus a little bit. I did have a couple takeaways that I jotted down as I went through it. Some stuff that stood out to me. One of them is that COVID is still an issue, despite the fact that it appears to be waning. And what I mean by that is, I think if you're not an educator, COVID disappears quicker for you than it does if you're an educator, especially a K-12 educator, because although case count and severity and all may be going down, the lingerings of the last 2 years are still being dealt with by staff in regards to education and social, emotional stuff. So it was a good reminder to me, because, being one of the few up here who's not an educator, it's kind of gone away quicker for me than I think it has for a lot of other people. So I found that interesting. I was pleasantly surprised, I guess, to hear that there was a couple comments from people who actually appreciated our diverse range of opinions on both sides of the spectrum and in the middle. A lot of people commented that that helps represent the needs of students best, you know, not having a board that leans all one direction on every single topic or the other. So that was, you know, that was good to hear that that's appreciated. I'm laughing because I also saw some comments on the continued need for facility improvement. And I think now that we've done what we've done, people can see how good it can be. And by comparison, what we have left doesn't look that great. So, you know, I noticed a few comments about that, which I agree with. And then I guess overall, to end, you know, we had comments, you know, we had people who thought we did a great job, people who thought we did a horrible job, and people who thought we were right in the middle. And, you know, although we'd like to have everybody love us, I think that represents a fair process overall, right? You've said plenty of times that, you know, when we make a decision, the fact that there's people who don't like it or do like it, and we kind of come together in the middle kind of represents a good process. So those were the, you know, those were the takeaways I had from going through it.
Great. No, Kevin, anything you want to add? You're off the hook on this since you're new, but you're welcome to comment if you want.
Found it interesting. Look forward to seeing the next one.
Great.
Yeah, I guess I didn't get a chance to read through all those comments yet, but I don't have too much to say. I mean, I guess I don't know where this is. I do think there's an opportunity to have better, like when the community comes to us with things, it feels like sometimes they get, I mean, having watched from the outside before as a board member, it feels like they sometimes just disappear and it doesn't feel like maybe they're followed up on by some of the community members. Like maybe there is a better opportunity to kind of like engage and let them understand the process or somehow feel that things are taken in and that there's a process to hold them going forward. So that makes any sense.
Meredith, we always invite you if you have anything you want to add.
Well, it kind of follows on to what you were saying, Noah. I think that that the concern, there are several areas that have been raised as concerns over the last 2 years that have really been put on a shelf, not completely, but to have a really engaged, thorough public process until we have capacity to get to those. And I think that there are some things we've addressed and other things we're waiting on. And I think it's time to move forward on those issues. And I know that, you know, that'll probably come up in our goal setting process. But the other side is we've been working internally on really hearing feedback and beginning to examine and hold up a mirror in places around technology and awards. Those are 2 areas in the survey where people say, well, you're not listening, or, you know, I feel like there's not a response. And so we've been working on these things, but really haven't felt like the time was right to engage in a public process around these. When we were surveying all the time about COVID, and we really felt the equity audit had to be prioritized. And so it is a matter of just deciding in the context of everything going on with COVID, what the capacity is for staff, but also what the capacity is for the community to meaningfully engage in important issues. So I guess, you know, I want to assure people that we're not trying to dismiss concerns, that we think there needs to be a meaningful process around both those issues that have been raised. But I think the time is coming where we can do that. I'm optimistic. And I think that, you know, it was nice to see that there's just an overall appreciation for the work. I mean, you all are volunteers, and there's a lot of time that you put into this role, and it's almost a thankless job, but I'm glad that there is some gratitude expressed for the really dedication it's taken over this time to deal with issues that really had no way to come out of, you know, decisions without some group upset with you. And so I think it's nice that the community expressed that appreciation, you know, but I think also there were some things expressed that I think it's important for us all to be reflective about, you know, board relationships with staff and processes. And I think those are things that we always kind of try to figure out what the right balance is. It's been something that, you know, Brian and I talk about it a lot as we're talking about issues. And so it's something that's interesting to hear from community what perception is about that. Just about that as we're moving forward.
Which is probably a good feed into the other thing that I had indicated we wanted to do, which is you have in your packets this, it's a 2-pager front back cheat sheet from the Maine School Board Association. There are actually a lot of laminate this and put this on every board member's table, both sides, the Robert Rules of Order and then these checklists. But we haven't done that. I continue to kind of like our focus on we have on the left of our agenda, but partly just based on good practices about the one time the board actually self-reflects and talks about the board and what's working, what's not working. So I didn't want to let that opportunity to pass, and partly, like Meredith said, based on some feedback, I thought it'd be helpful to we could go through any of these sections, and maybe we should set time at other board meetings to go through some of them. The one I wanted to go through first was Code of Ethics for board members. I'll just note this is a standard list that comes from the Maine School Board or Maine School Management Association, which is the school board and the superintendent associations merged together. But we have adopted this verbatim as a policy. It's policy BCA. The only difference is policy BCA. We added an additional item S, which is a request not to campaign publicly for other board members or against other board members during elections. We just had a few situations where people did that, and then lo and behold, they ended up serving with somebody they campaigned against or not. We can't abridge First Amendment rights of board members, so it's a request. But that's other than that, and I don't want to dwell on that point because it's not even election time. But other than that, just to note that this is exactly the policy that's been adopted by the board. So I thought I'd just read them and then I'd pause. And if any of us want to throw out a comment, question, agree, disagree, right? This was not written by anybody who's here in this room right now. So if there's disagreements or comments or questions, or those of us who've been on board, this one's been really important to me to keep in mind, or really hard for me to keep in mind, I thought that would be useful. And I think it's important, again, kind of reading, every time I read the survey, I realize how few people know what the board actually does and what the board can do and can't do and is responsible for and isn't responsible for. So I hope this is helpful for other people. Some of these I think are parenthood and apple pie, so we don't have to belabor those. But if anybody wants to stop on any of these, please speak up. I will view service on the board as an opportunity to serve my community, state, nation, because I believe public education is the best means to promote the welfare of our people and to preserve our democratic way of life. I'm going to guess that's parenthood and apple pie. We all have our kids in public schools. We refuse the stipend, which is very nominal for the public service we do serving on the board. Anything anybody wants to comment on that? Another one that I think is parenthood and apple pie. I will at all times think of children first and base my decisions on how they will affect children, their education, and their training.
I would say that's parenthood and apple pie, but that's probably the most important one on this list.
Yeah.
In my opinion. So
Yep.
if you could get rid of everything else. I'm not advocating for that, but that's the number one top of the list.
It is, and I find myself when I'm faced with a difficult decision and I'm not really sure which direction to go. Lately, I've been just asking myself, okay, what decision is in the best interest of the most children? Because ultimately, that's what we're here for.
That's obviously an impactful one. Any other thoughts on that one? Next one, I will make no disparaging remarks in or out of board meetings about other members of the board or their opinions. I'm not aware of this happened in a long time, although, as came out in the survey, people watch the tone towards other board members as well. I think that's important. I think we had a really tough year, but I think that's important. Anything else on that one? This next one, I think is, I agree with Mark. B is number one, but D is probably the most central one specific to the board. I will remember that at all times that as an individual, I have no legal authority outside the meetings of the board, that I will conduct my relationships with school staff, the local citizenry, and all media of communications on the basis of that fact. To me, that basically means that, you know, I don't speak for the board. And you know, and it just means, I guess the key phrase is the way I conduct my relationships, right? My power as a board member is what I say and how I vote sitting in this room. And so outside of this room, you know, basically outside of this room, the only relationships I have where it matters that I'm a board member is when I talk to one of my 4 colleagues on the board, when I talk to the superintendent, or when somebody approaches me as a board member. And when they do that, I'm pretty careful to just listen and not, you know, I don't say, well, I agree with you, I disagree with you, or, you know, or promise that, well, I'll get that fixed or I'll look into that. Those just aren't my functions. My function is to listen, bring that back into this room here with the 5 people. And also, I think it comes up later here to tell them what the complaint process is, which is to go through the chain of talk to the staff member you have a problem with, talk to the principal, talk to the superintendent. And yes, there is a, you know, function of last resort. If none of those work, bring it to the board. But that's really my function outside of this room, is to listen and to explain the complaint process. But the rest of it is to bring it out here. And sometimes it's pretty painful to have conversations in public because, and okay, you know, there are a few things when an individual student or staff member is involved where we go into executive session, but you know, there's a reason legislative bodies have sunshine laws. And so bringing my conversation primarily to my fellow board members and the superintendent at meetings, or superintendent outside of meetings, is kind of the thing it's not necessarily intuitive, but that's what I've found is the same. I guess I'll phrase that as that's the rule I found the hardest, but the most important.
I will add to that. We used to talk more about directing people to resolution at the lowest level. And what I mean by that is if you have a parent that comes to you with an issue, you know, instead of taking it upon yourself to solve that issue, that's not what we do. It's start with the teacher, right? And if you don't get the resolution you want with that teacher, then go to the building administrator, and then obviously the superintendent, and then if need be, you know, the board. But you know, trying to seek that resolution at the lowest level of authority, so to speak.
I have a question. I mean, I guess one question I have is, as a board member, say an issue comes up, or just in general, like I want to learn, I want to inform the conversation we're going to have or the vote. Like my instinct is to go out and talk to like people in the community and the staff and the school and like look around and try to understand for myself in that way first, so that I understand and inform before I come here and vote. And I guess it sounds a little bit at odds with your reading of this, but it feels to me like the only way I can make an informed decision. So.
I mean, I guess my thought, I mean, I hear your point, and I guess this is why I comment it's the hardest for me, is I have the same instinct, right, to go do my own research, right? A lot of us up here are researchers, and to go do my own research. But what's been effective for me is to talk to the superintendent. You know, if we have a bad superintendent, they could be spinning things, but we don't, in my opinion, have a bad superintendent right now. I get a fairly accurate representation of the range of opinions and pros and cons when I talk to the superintendent. So that to me is an important, that's my first avenue of research, is to talk to the superintendent. We have formal channels, right? Request for information at the end of our agenda, but I don't want to put words in Merida's mouth, but her practice has always been any of us can reach out to her by email or phone at any point in time and ask questions. So that's a path. And the other one, I think maybe it just takes a little bit of time, but the community is not shy in telling me what they think. And so I have increasingly relied on that function rather than trying to actively seek out information myself. I just worry, I totally get the instinct, I have it myself, but I also worry that going up and asking people, number one, it communicates that I have authority that I don't necessarily have, or it can, depending on how the question's asked anyway. Another thing is it can make people uncomfortable. Not parents so much when I'm chatting on the playground. If you see me mostly as just a parent, but one that they want to bend my ear a little bit more, which is fine. That's my job, is to listen. But with teachers, I think it can make them quite uncomfortable to be approached by a board member. I don't know what the right metaphor is, but the board is this kind of really bright, hot spotlight. And most teachers, it's just like all of us in all of our jobs, right? We don't want our boss's boss walking down the hallway, bringing us out into the spotlight, or very few of us do. And that is, for a teacher, that's what we are. We're the superintendent's boss, who's the principal's boss, who's the teacher's boss. So this is like the CEO of this is like the president of the university, right? Coming into my office. And I don't know, a lot of faculty probably would like it if the president of the university came into their office, but I think a lot of teachers don't like it. So I think there's that, teachers and staff in general. So there's that component.
Even from the standpoint of, we all have kids, right? And from time to time, issues come up with our kids. And, my wife doesn't like it, but I have her take the lead on a lot of that stuff, only because of the fact that I'm on the board and I don't want things to be uncomfortable for staff, or things to be misconstrued, So it's a delicate balance even there too,
Yeah, I guess, I definitely hear that. You hear the awkwardness and uncomfortableness that would come. I guess, I don't read this as written as intending that, but I also wonder if part of this other problem of the board feeling in these board evaluations like something that isn't well connected to the community, and the ranking really low and feeling like we put things on the shelf and don't get to them. I do wonder if some of the self-isolation of ourselves is counterproductive.
I guess I want to add in there because I feel similar to how you're expressing it, and as I'm hearing folks talk, I'm realizing the difference in the board as an elected position, say than the town council, because my initial conception of the elected official is the person who mingles with the public that you represent. But we have this sort of interesting relation in that we hire people, or we approve budgets. And so we're in a sort of particular authoritative position that the town council is. I can talk to the town council and they can't do anything to me at all, right? Really, Joan Fernie-Windy can't do anything to me either, not really. So there's a different sort of power differential that I'm kind of understanding as you're explaining this, that, for teachers and administrators, that if they irritate us, we could potentially really mess things up for them in a way that we couldn't for an ordinary citizen.
Yeah.
And so that's just now this is occurring to me, but I do feel the same thing you expressed, and that you expressed that I want to get out there and hear everybody's concerns and inform myself. And I didn't realize, of course, the consequences of approving all of these things, that it might feel very much like your boss's boss's boss is asking your opinion, and that's maybe not a safe thing to express. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think that's accurate. And one thing I'll say, just in my experience on the board, and this is applicable to all of the different constituency groups out there, whether it's parents, community members, teachers, and even building administrators, right? My experience has been if they want a board member to know something, they will take the initiative to inform the board member of that, right? That generally, if they have something they want us to know, they take the initiative. We don't need to solicit that. Now, is that true across the board? No. But my experience has been that if somebody wants us to know something, they'll either do it through one of the many formal channels we have, such as public comment at a board meeting. All of our emails and phone numbers are listed on the website. And as Brian said, our responsibility as board members is to listen, right? You can answer questions to a certain extent, but it's really to listen. And then depending on what the wishes of that particular person are, I always say, well, is this something you would like to be brought up for discussion at the board level? And if it's yes, then you bring it to the whole group. If it's not, and they say, well, and then my response is always, well, there's proper channels for this. And as Jake pointed out, if you bring it, there's an initial step. There's always a lot of steps before it gets to us, unless this is the only case where it would come directly to us. If there are concerns surrounding the superintendent, then we're the first step. But otherwise, we're never the first step in a formal process, at least. So, I mean, I would get Noah's concern and Kevin and yours as well, but historically, I think, and I don't see any reason why this would change, if you know, whether it's teacher or parent or community member wants collectively us or individual us or some subset of us to know something, they'll take the initiative and do that.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of confirm what you were saying, Kevin, I've heard teachers express, oh, I can't say that because they're a board member and they're, you know, they can influence my job. I think, like you were noting, reality may be a little different if they've been here for 2 years, they're on a continuing contract. But, you know, and I always say that, and then they say, well, yeah, but you can make me go teach, you know, Russian in South Orono or whatever it is, right? So yeah, we just do have influence over employees' jobs, and so I do hear people express that to me directly. And towards Mark's, other times when issues have gotten heated in the board, you know, there's some not just light that flames happening around board meetings and public comment with 20 people at public comment. I almost always hear from somebody who says, I just don't feel like I can speak out. And so, and towards Mark's point, I think this is probably a function of time on the board, but I get stopped at the grocery store with opinions about what's going on. I don't have kids in ASA anymore, but whenever I was at ASA, where I was in the building on a regular basis, I would hear things. We go to parent-teacher conferences and I'll hear things. I have teachers who will call me up, you know, that I don't have a relationship with outside of the fact that they're a teacher. I have, you know, all of my friends, I've been living here 11 years. I've got a pretty large network in Orono at this point. I will hear from that. I will hear from people on campus about it. So I don't personally have a concern that I'm not hearing. My bigger concern is actually what's the bias of the group that's choosing to speak to me, right? And that's why I go back to the point of, I think it's really important that I get the superintendent's perspective on all these things too. Doesn't mean that I agree with the superintendent's perspective, or it doesn't mean a parent or a teacher doesn't have a different perspective. They often do, but that's my biggest concern is not that I'm not going to get enough feedback. It's that there's a selective filter and a bias to the feedback that I'm getting. And so that, you know, that's another factor. On some ultimate level, you know, we exist at the board, and comments sent to the board are probably the feedback that people care about them. Anyway, anybody else want to process anything else on D? E, I will recognize that my responsibility is not to operate the schools, but to see that they are well operated.
That's a pretty important one too.
Yeah.
It's a pretty fundamental rule to being on the board. You know, we're not involved in the day-to-day operations of the school. We're here to make sure that things are run well overall.
Yeah. I mean, as I noted, the laws and courts have given us ridiculous power. We could vote to set every clock in the school to be 10 minutes fast or 10 minutes slow, or that, you know, class X will be offered in location Y at time Z. But that's just not an effective way for a board to function. There's got to be a clear distinction between the strategic position of a board and the operations of the, right? Once we go down that road, why would anybody ever talk to the superintendent again? Right? It's just like, come to the board and I'll get my problem fixed. And oftentimes the person who's coming goes back to what I said about the bias about what I'm receiving, right? That's just rewarding the person who's bold enough to come to the board instead of go to the superintendent and work through this kind of process and collaboration.
You know, to add to that a little bit, the one thing I've learned over the years, and it's just human nature, people don't speak out boldly when they're happy, but they do when they're not happy, right? So, you know, just because we have, you know, a small group of people that's, you know, unhappy, that doesn't mean that there's not people who are happy, who are just not choosing to speak because they're happy and there's no need for them to speak. So, you know, you kind of have to take all that with a grain of salt, so to speak.
Anything else on E? I mean, this is the one that's the hardest to get right. There's no black and white line between operate versus allow somebody else to operate. You know, and to be perfectly honest, that balance changes with the size of the district, right? That balance in Bangor is different than the balance here in Orono. And I have family members who have been both a superintendent and a principal in small island schools where there's 500 members of the community and 7 teachers. And the balance is different in those communities than it is in Orono. So there is no black and white line. And this is one that to me is a constant conversation of, is the board overstepping its opinion or its role or not? Meredith and I have this conversation all the time. I'll say, do you want that to be a discussion item or do you want that to be a board vote? And we talk through, well, does that look like setting strategic direction or approving finances and policies, or does that look like operating the schools? So obviously you all can have a different opinion from what Meredith and I decided, but that's the conversation and tension that goes on all the time. I will seek to provide education for all children in the community commensurate with their needs and abilities. I think that one is pretty obvious. I will listen to all citizens, but will refer all complaints to the proper authorities. We'll discuss such complaints only at a regular meeting after failure of the administrative solution. Let's take it to the lowest level, work up the chain. The board does have a role as place of final appeal, but we just need to make sure it's the place of final appeal. I will support a decision made by the majority of the board graciously. It's not always an easy one. I think the benefits are obvious too, though.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
I absolutely agree with that, but to take it a step further, if I've kind of learned anything over my time of doing this, you have to be really good at compartmentalizing things. So just because you know, a decision didn't go your way on one topic on the agenda, you kind of have to set that aside and move to the next topic on the agenda with a clean slate attitude and not let that spill over into the next decision, right? And that's hard to do because, you know, we're people of emotion, but it's really important to compartmentalize everything that we do, put it in a box, set it aside, that's done, we're moving to the next thing and not let that spill over.
I will criticize employees publicly, but I will not criticize employees publicly. Important word there. Yeah, well, I mean, that goes all the way to the federal 14th Amendment of the US Constitution. They have a right, employees have a right to privacy. It will make such criticism to the superintendent for investigation and action if necessary. I think that the second part of the clause is important. You know, if I've heard 3 different things, if I hear one thing about a teacher, I'm just like, well, that's probably about the person telling me. But if I hear 3 complaints, I'm like, I'm the eyes and the ears of the district. But what I do with that is I take it to the superintendent and turn it over. I will make decisions openly after all facts bearing on a question have been presented and discussed. That's, I think, basic legislation. Keep an open mind until all the facts are out. I will refuse to make promises as to how I will vote on a matter that should properly come before the board. That's really a special case of D. I will not discuss the confidential business of the board in my home, on the street, or in my office. The place for such discussions being the school board meeting. That's really an elaboration of D again. I will confine my board action to policymaking, planning, and appraisal, leaving the administration of the schools to the superintendent. That's sort of an extension of E, you know. We have absolute power in that we have hire, review responsibility to the superintendent, but that's really, aside from policies and budget, that's really, to me, the key power of the board is the superintendent screwing up. We have the ability to fix that, but we don't have the ability for lots of reasons to reach down to more granular levels. I will welcome and encourage cooperation and participation by teachers, administrators, and other personnel in developing policies that affect their welfare and that of the children they serve. This is also state law and in our union contract that teachers have a right to have input on policy, even though policy is clearly spelled out as the prerogative and domain of the board. To me, this one is a much bigger principle, which is that the board doesn't have a role in taking decisions on a lot of things, but the board has a role in ensuring that a good process is taken towards a decision. And that's a really important distinction to me. The board doesn't decide all these things, but the board makes sure that there is a good process. And to me, a good process is symmetric. right? You recognize policy and budget are the primary responsibility of the board. But I want to hear from everybody who has input about that. And it's kind of the flip, you know, I don't operate the schools when changes are happening, but if there's something biggish happening, you know, a big curriculum change, bell schedule change, I think it's important that people other than just the teachers or administrators at least are part of the process and have input for that, which is why we have a pretty strong tradition in this district of, you know, student representative to these. Well, A, we have a strong tradition of having committees before making big decisions, which I know feels like bureaucracy, but that's how process happens. B, we have a strong tradition of parent and student representatives to committees, and also board largely representing parent community, but also the taxpayer community to these. So this one is the one that I not disagree with. I completely agree with that, but expand to a much bigger thing about a complete, robust process on big decisions of all types. And a symmetry, you know, I want teachers' input, but I also hope teachers want input from other people too. I will endeavor all times to see that schools have adequate financial support within the capabilities of community and state in order that every child may receive the best possible education. That's the nub of it, comes down to it tonight, right? We got to spend money to educate kids, and we got to not get thrown out of town with pitchforks from the taxpayers. So we've got to find a balance. I resist every temptation and outside pressure to use my position as a school board member to benefit myself or any individual or agency. Apart from that's nepotism, I think that's pretty clear. The next one's about work. I will endeavor to attend every regular and special board meeting, recognizing that my presence means representation for my town or city. I find this is not possible for an extended length of time. We're not talking about one meeting there. I will give consideration of resigning from my position on the board. And I will recognize at all times the school board of which I am a member is an agent of the state, and as such, I will abide by the laws of the state and the regulations formulated by the main DOE and the State Board of Education. Any general thoughts on any of those? Any thoughts? I don't think we want to keep going tonight, but any thoughts on whether that's a useful exercise and we want to return to the right-hand column sometime as a board?
I think at the very least, it belongs in the packet, right? So it should be in the folders, and it was good that Rachel put it in there. And I could certainly see value in, you know, picking other parts of this, you know, whether it's at the, you know, goal setting or, you know, sometime not on a night where we're crazy packed with other things, but, you know, in the fall, sometimes we often have lighter agendas, at least, you know, kind of September, October, that might be the time for it.
You know, and I'm not proposing we do this, but back in the day, we used to have new board member orientation, right? We used to have someone from was it MSA, come in and go through all this stuff with us. I'm not saying we do that. I don't think we need to.
Yeah.
But something like this is good, you know, especially when we have turnover.
Yep.
You know, I don't think we need the full-blown orientation like we used to do back in the day, but I think something like this is good. And it's even good for me and others who've been on the board for a while to just reorientate yourself with what you're here for.
One thing I would also add is there's a lot more training available to board members, especially at the main school management fall conference. Topics on boardsmanship, but also on just a wide variety of issues. And you know, being able to hear from other people who are board members and superintendents in other areas. I would just encourage anyone on the board to attend that. We'll let you know when that's going to be in the fall. But you know, we used to bring MSMA before my time here to do board training ever so often, and we've gotten away from that. And really, I think going to the MSMA conference, if you can, is even better because it's, you know, just a lot of topics to choose from and really can develop knowledge in you know, areas of interest or areas that you think would be helpful for you in your board role. And I find it helpful every year to go to that conference and hear from the DOE and from main school management and attorneys and other people in the field. So it's another way to seek out training.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the bottom right corner, it's did we commit time to our own learning to support informed decision making, which, you know, some of that is specific to questions, but I do think board training is part of that. And I totally agree with Meredith. The MSMA conference, which happens in October, it's 2 days. Do we know yet if it's in person or online?
I haven't heard.
I haven't heard yet this year either, but it's typically Thursday, Friday, Saturday. It's just a fantastic experience. maybe first among which is just to sit there at a lunch table and chat with other board members and see what kind of issues is going on in their district and how they're handling it. So I would definitely encourage and challenge all board members to think about that MSMA conference. Meredith and I get emails all the time about other trainings. And we kind of always are like, oh, should we forward or not? And most of the time my answer is I'd just rather see everybody go to the MSMA conference. You know, I'll go to the Drummond and Woodson Policy Conference, and Meredith goes to the Drummond and Woodson, and Lisa to the Special Ed Conference. And anybody who really wants to get into boardsmanship, there's a state school board and there's regional school board meetings. That was the last one we talked about whether to forward it or not. And it's like, I know all your time is finite and your volunteers, but I would really, really push the MSMA conference in October. And Mark, I think you're right that the timing for more evaluations probably in the fall. Our schedule is less tight. Okay, any last thoughts before we move on? I don't know, to the audience, I hope that was useful. I hope that didn't feel like self-indulgence, but we are literally forbidden by law from talking to each other outside of board meetings. So we have to do these things at some point. I do, it's probably useful for other people to hear what was in our code of ethics and what we perceive our roles and limits to be as well. Okay, next up, we have capital improvement planning. You want to kick that up, Meredith? You want me to?
Sure. So back in 2019, I think, the board, in conjunction with a number of committees that we established to help develop our plan for a construction project that we see coming to a close soon, developed a scope of work for the larger construction project that was going to be a part of our bond that we took out to the public, and the major construction project with our architect and general contractor. And during that process, the reality of how far our funds would go compared to our list of wants and needs had to come to a reckoning. And so we ended up pulling out some projects from the main project with our general contractor and what we took out to bid to do in what we called self-managed projects as the larger project came to a close. And we did this for two reasons. One, to wait and see how that project ended up financially and what was left in the bond to help fund some of these things, along with district funds that we had in capital improvement reserve. So we would know, what our budget looked like. And secondly, smaller projects that we felt were projects that would maybe be easier for us to handle. It's in part, at least, it didn't work quite as complex as other parts of the project that really required full engineering and architect services and just lots of different trades involved. And so we had a list that we've been working on somewhat, actually. A couple of them have been checked off this year as we've had opportunity to find a way to incorporate those into the project in a way that we felt made sense financially. So what you have in the folder is a document that looks like a spreadsheet that we put together that kind of summarizes where we are right now. I took this information to the building committee recently. So I'd like to just kind of walk through it with you because I think it would be it's a helpful context to have for the conversation. And this document.
I'm sorry, what document?
This one?
Yeah. I forget what it's called. Yeah,
And it's printed in the.
yes.
There should be 3 budgetary, like 3 spreadsheets. They're all in the middle of it, I think.
It's at the end of the budget spreadsheets.
It's called bond self-managed projects in the electronic folder. And there's an updated version that I put in there today, and I think that's what Rachel copied for you. So our revenue picture, we took out a $16.845 million bond. And at this point in that account, or at least in the middle of March, when we looked at this with the building committee, we had just under $2 million left in that account. In our capital reserve, at this point, we have $528,000. That's a reserve account that we have that we can put money in through the annual warrants. We can pull money in from unassigned. We can budget money to go in there. And it's a way to augment our annual budget each year to help support ongoing capital improvement needs of the district. So kind of in total, the revenue picture for us to do capital improvement work of this nature is, that total 2.5 million at this point. And I outlined on the right side of the page at the top, the expenses that we have or had at that time left in the project with our contract with Bowman Constructors, the general contractor for the main project, including the main contract, approved change orders and change events, some equipment that we've ordered that hadn't been invoiced yet. And then we left ourselves some room for other miscellaneous costs that come up either in the form of additional change orders that come through or just other equipment needs that come up. And so we're estimating that 1.145 million figure is what will be needed to finish out the project with Bowman. The self-managed list is what you see there. And those are the 6 items that were really, that bubbled to the surface as priorities for us that we wanted to try to accomplish with what was left from the bond or from a combination of that and capital improvement reserves. The building committee met to discuss these in mid-March, and we went through a process to discuss these. They've been really aware of these all along. We talked about them again. For some of these, well, for 2 of them, we at that point were awaiting, I think we had one of the quotes and then we were waiting on the other. They've actually both been updated now as recent as today for the siding replacement. And the committee agreed that the first 2 on the list are the absolute first priorities that have to be done. And then really we went through an exercise of the next 4 to prioritize based on all the members weighing in as to what the building committee felt the order of those projects should be done, in case something had to wait or couldn't be accomplished within the funds we had. So the siding replacement, we have a quote for that. It was updated today because when we talked to building committee, we realized there was one part that wasn't included in the quote that we really wanted to add in. That was doing the front of the kindergarten wing there to match the front facade. So that quote is in as 183,000. Roof repairs, this amount of 180,000 really was generated with what do we think we can put aside to that, not knowing at the time what the actual cost for roof repairs was going to be, but saying let's put aside a chunk of money to help us toward that effort. And we put aside 180,000 in our estimate of how we would fund these projects down the road. The estimates have come in for OHS, OMS, and you can see that total is 421,000. We haven't gotten the ASA repair estimate yet. The ASA repairs actually are much, the needs are shown to be less there than at the middle and high school. And this 180,000 was actually set aside for OHS because at the time, the information we had from the facility review that we had was that OHS roof was really the roof that was in the worst shape. There is an area at ASA, 2 areas at ASA that we feel like need to be considered. And when we get those numbers, we'll have to consider those as well. So that's another thing. The $421,000 quote is new information and we have $180,000 budgeted there. I gave you the quotes for those. They're in, I think they're in your packet, the roof systems that show how much each area cost and what that area is. And Bill and Brian and myself have looked at this and kind of talked about based on the feedback Bill got from the vendor, from the contractor about maybe where to start with that effort. We'll circle back to that in a second. I just want to give an overview. And so the exercise we took was with the other 4 to vote. You can see out to the right how the building committee ranked those. They ranked the central office move, getting rid of the 40-year-old portable next door here. And then second was renovating the ASA former kitchen so it can be a usable instructional space. The third was renovating this space, the OMS OHS library, and the fourth was the concession restroom building. It wasn't complete agreement, but there was pretty broad agreement with a couple of outliers about this ranking. The thing about all of these estimates is the estimates are very old or rough. I was talking to one of the engineering firms that we have a proposal from today, and these numbers might be very far off. We don't really know until we engage someone to go through a process with us to get further with some design and drawings for us that we can take out for some preliminary cost estimation. Because I think once we know that, then we will have some decisions to make. And so, this is when you look at all this together, if these numbers were to hold that we had put in the column here that I've calculated, we would, just be around $80,000 short of being able to do everything. However, what I know is turning out to be true is, estimates are, at least like the roof came in a couple $100,000 more than what we set aside. That's not to say we have to do everything now with the roof. We can have a plan to chip away at it over time. But some of these other numbers are likely to come in higher than what we have here. So we wanted to bring the board up to speed on this information, because ultimately the board's going to need to make a decision about, where we're going with these priorities that the building committee has brought forward as recommendations. They're, of an amount of expenditure that really requires board approval to move forward with these types of expenditures. We're not proposing that we go out for any more bonds. That's not what this is about. It's about using the money that we have to finish out some of the priorities that were established as priorities by our process 3 years ago, and seeing how far that combined with our capital reserves can take us now. And then anything that doesn't make it on, doesn't get taken care of now, would go into work that Bill and I will do to lay out for you a plan for capital improvement over the next 10 years that might include pieces of some of these, along with what Brian was referring to earlier, the rolling renovations that we had started and then really paused during the construction project because it was just too much to do during that time. That's just kind of some context. Brian, Bill, would you add anything to that context?
And the only thing I would add, which was the thing I forgot earlier, is that just to remind people that there was a conscious decision not to do work at the middle school because it was built in the 1920s. It's a beautiful building. We don't want to get rid of the building, but basically to qualify for state funding of construction, you have to let your building fall apart to a certain degree. Yeah, which is a beautiful formula, but the problem is there's too many needs chasing too few dollars. The state's just never really fully funded school construction. So everything else we've done was self-financed, or in other words, taxpayer financed here in the town. But we, after getting evaluated by the architects, we had a pretty good guess that the middle school would actually rank high enough in the list above the cutoff to get funding the next time the state has a school construction funding project. But there is a concern if we start putting money into it now, it's just going to make it less likely to get funded. And so that comment, I think, is particularly relevant to the roofs, that it's not that there couldn't be needs identified in the middle school roofs, but we're really, I think, just trying to hold tight for a year or two and hoping that this next round of school construction funding comes out and that the middle school can qualify. But that's just to remind people. I think some people in the survey had forgotten or didn't know that too, but it's not that we don't, whatever it is people think about the middle school, it's obviously equally important to all the other buildings, but there's a specific strategy around the way the state funds things that's causing that to be put on hold for a little bit and putting money into the other two buildings for now. So I mean, that comes up in the context of roofs. But that's the only context I would add.
The only thing I would say, the roofing that we had done, they really did a really good job. I actually have 3 drawings that are better drawings than what you've got. If you ever want to see them, drawn to scale, showing us where everything's coming out of the roof, issues with the roof, pitches. I mean, we've got a really good understanding of our roof system now, more than we ever did that I can find. So it's really good. They did a really nice job. We really got our money's worth on this. So it'll give us a chance to, set a goal going forward to get fixed what we need to get fixed. So, and they even had a chance to even list years the roofs were put in. So we, like I said, it's given us a really good way forward to try to get this stuff fixed.
So towards that last point, our new roofs are 30 years old, I think.
Yeah, we've got the ones we've got listed here are 80s. We've also got 1995s, and it jumps up to 2021, 22.
You guys said, Mark, you were on the building committee. I thought you might be poised to say something there.
Well, I was gonna ask Bill's opinion if in his opinion, we could do this as a staggered, we don't have to do it all at once. What's your opinion on that? Can we do it piecemeal, keeping in mind Brian's point about we're really trying to not do anything at the middle school unless it's absolutely necessary?
Yeah, I think we can, but there is some worry over the roof degradation that's happened. But I also realize we've got other projects we really need to try to get done. What we've got them up there doing right now is doing a lot more patching. This past week, they've been up cleaning some of our drain holes. Some of our drains are plugged, and we're a little worried that they might even plug further than we thought they were. But yeah, I think we can stagger this out. But we're gonna have to be very cautious as we move forward and not drop it. Because we got 5 roofs that really need our attention. After that, we've still got roofs from 1995. So you're gonna start getting into that as we go forward. Do I think we can get by? I hope. I know that's not a great feeling, but we've also got, like I said, we've also got other projects we got to do as well. So I think we picked 2 of the major, 2 of the hardest roofs we've got, get them done. We do have a temporary fix on one of our other roofs in the middle school to get us by. That's all been done, taken care of today. But yeah, I think we can do it staggered. I think we have to. I really don't think we have a choice. I mean, you really don't have a choice to, spend $500,000 on your roofs right now and still get everything else done you need to get done.
I think we do. It just means other things don't get done.
It doesn't get done, but I
That's
think we can stagger. I personally,
Yeah.
if you ask my opinion, I think we can stagger it out and make that happen. Just
And following up on that, would the 180 that we budgeted, would that solve the most pressing, not just temporarily, would that allow us to address the most pressing current problems?
it will allow us to get 2 roofs done right now that are very important. I think we're at like 190. I think when I look at these budgetary numbers, we're at about 190 for the 2 roofs that I think we picked out. I think it was roof B and D, wasn't that?
I think it was
E and D.
B and D.
Yeah.
I got a circle. I remember
A,
circle.
right?
Yeah.
A.
Yeah,
Did we do A?
Yeah.
I had B and D
Classroom.
circle.
it was the 2-story wing and in the cafeteria, right?
Yeah, that would get us, I think that 180s get us pretty close. And the numbers might even come in less than that. These are budgetary numbers only. They are not hard numbers right now, so.
Yeah, no,
I
no.
just had a couple of questions trying to understand. So just because, so this money has to be spent, like, I don't even understand this process, but like has to be spent on building within a certain amount of time, or just like, so what are the rules on like that's.
So the
certain
bond
project?
money, when
Yeah.
we take out the bond, has to be spent for the project it was intended for within 3 years, I think, from the time you take out the bond. That's the 12.145.
Yeah.
It's kind of a longer story about how we finance. We financed a little over 12 million in an initial 20-year bond. No, 2018.
27, I want to say.
Yeah, 20-ish. I don't have the number in my head right now. Bond. And then we, the smaller amount, 4.8 or 4.7, we are doing in a couple of bond anticipation notes, and that has a different time frame. So we're within the time that we, we're fine to spend this money. We'll have no problem spending it within the time that we have to spend it within. We've
Yeah.
already spent the 12.145. So we've satisfied the most immediate spending need.
And then, are these these are the things that has to be spent on, like on this list, and is that the?
Well, it's the list that the committee that came up with our scope came up with. We do have to spend it on the activities that we took out to the voters for the bond vote.
It was a month-long process involving months
Yeah.
long, involving multiple public forums and surveys. I mean, it was a pretty in-depth process.
Yeah, so we can't say, well, we need more money for staffing. You know, we can't divert in that way. But we do have some flexibility around setting priorities within the list of needs that we've identified for facility improvements.
A list of building things that are on the list. You couldn't come up with like a new building thing like that isn't on the list. Or like,
Well, probably if there was something that was related, because we worded the question, I think, to give us some flexibility around this kind of question, because we weren't sure how far the funds were going to go. So if, best case scenario, we did, we got what we wanted for less than anticipated, and we could go further on the list. If we left it open-ended so things could be added if they were able to be added, or switched out if priorities shifted.
I mean, just to back up the process where this list came from, it's about 3 or 4 years old at this point, but we did two things. We hired an architect firm to come in and do a facilities assessment, which is the state of our facilities. That was an initial $40,000 contract, and out of that came a long list of maintenance needs and also a long list of new programmatic needs, new classrooms, new kitchens, et cetera, cafeterias, et cetera. That process also included extensive stakeholder input. We had a banner across Main Street saying, "Come have chili and tell us about our buildings." And we had 150 people in the middle school cafeteria. And the architects ran, involved in part of these kinds of processes, small group discussions that feed up to a master list. So there was a very comprehensive process. And then we put together five areas were identified, and we put together committees in each of those 5 areas, right? So the arts was one, athletics and fields was one, ASA was one, high school and middle school was one, and there was a 5th, if I remember.
Oh, it was just 4, maybe.
Maybe it was 4. And anyway, each of those committees, there was one board member serving on each of those committees. There were community members, principals, staff members involved in each of those committees. So each of those committees did prioritization within their areas. Then that came back to basically to the board. Board walked through and did a final prioritization and cut off of this is how much we can send a bond out for. Ongoing since then, we've had a building committee, which is regularly checking in. And when you see these votes of prioritization, that's coming
Bond
from
was obviously approved by the voters.
bond was approved by the voters. If there was one thing I heard from the voters at that time, I did a marathon 12-hour tabling at one of our municipal elections, the March election before the bond went up in June, with just a little pamphlet. And I talked to an awful lot of voters. If there's one thing I heard, it's really, we were really disappointed you let the buildings run down that much and you have that much deferred maintenance. I also heard a lot of enthusiasm for, the schools taking care of their buildings, but there was specifically a comment about letting the buildings run down. So this list you see is literally about 4 years of process that's been being updated by the building committee. The building committee, again, is, you've heard this phrase from me, it's a cross-stakeholder working group. It's got community members, it's got teachers, it's got administrators, it's got board members on it. Kind of updating this list. Does that mean that it's impossible that something has arisen as an entirely new need in the 4 years since this whole process started that should be a higher priority than this money? I'm open to the possibility. Maybe this is a case where I'm too close to it, but this is out of literally the most extensive process this district has done in probably 20 years in terms of stakeholder input, as well as expert input from architects, leading to kind of this current priority list. Be that what, if you were to tell me what we really should spend $400,000 on a gazebo outside of ASA, I don't know. I'm a little bit torn. Part of me is like, well, we should be open to the money. We have the money. Like Meredith said, the money is restricted to construction, and in some cases, some more specific parameters, but it's basically restricted to construction. We're not super tight on when we spend it, but we are strongly legally limited to both the reserve fund and the bond to spending on construction. So if you want to come up with something totally new, half of me is like, well, we should at least have that conversation. Half of me, though, So I just want to make sure that we don't override, the weight of lots of input that's happened already. So that's kind of the current status, but we are at that point. If we want to have a conversation about something that's not on this list, tonight's the night to bring that up, because this is what we're about, is starting to commit to the next phase of construction projects.
Well, let me just ask you about the ASA side. Just so you said that ASA siding was to make it match. Was that just a cosmetic thing or like a functional?
The siding itself is in disrepair in a lot of places. And so it's been part of our plan all along to do that ourselves, because to do it in the construction project was just going to cost too much money. And
It's
so,
actually pretty high up on the list of recommendations from.
right, from the facilities review.
We just felt we could do it much cheaper. We don't have to pay a general contractor. We don't have to pay an architect. You don't need an architect to design siding. No.
Yeah, the last change though, the first quote was for 163,000. And when we looked at it and asked some questions, we realized there was one area that we wanted them to do in the project, and it just kind of got lost last summer in the push to get us ready to open. And so we decided we would just push that over into our side of things rather than having them tie in what they had done right at the front door to that front section by the playground there.
I mean, that siding is a pretty good example. That was siding, it was 15-year rated siding when we put it in, and it's been, was it 25 years, I think, since that siding went in.
It's T111.
Yeah.
It's T111 siding. It's cheap plywood. And if you go along the wall on like the Foursquare side of the playground, you'll see that is rotting. I mean, honestly, our biggest worry is we take off the rotting siding and we find that there's rotting studs or something behind that. So that's the reason, that and the roofs, which obviously, right now we have a roof over our brand new cafeteria, right? The walls and roof aren't new, but the interior is new, leaking. So that's our biggest worry. That's why the roof and the siding are the tip top thing, is we're potentially actively destroying the construction we just did. So.
But that would be, sort of my question. And I think, is it Bill? Yeah, Bill and Mark kind of addressed this. For me, when I've owned a house, if I wanted to renovate the living room or the roof, it was always the roof first. And so my concern is, it looks like there's enough money to do all the roof, middle school excluded for the reasons you expressed. But, and I imagine this has been discussed, of course. And so, but it does sound like you're acknowledging some risk that if we wait too long on the roof, maybe it leaks on some of the things that are renovated. And so what was the reasoning that the committee came up for not just saying, let's just fix all of the roof that we can, middle school accepted, and then we'll see what's left over for some of the other projects, of which all look fantastic, but I mean, roofs trump most things, for me anyway.
The quote just came in and the building committee didn't have that number.
Oh, okay.
And so we were waiting on the estimates to come in from the roof inspection. And so, seeing that now, 180 doesn't cover the whole list. And I'm not sure we thought that 180 would cover the whole list. It was what we put aside as a placeholder, and then wanted to do an assessment as the time got near to see how that money could be best used.
Those numbers were generated before supply chain issues.
They were,
jacked up
all of the
costs.
numbers were.
Well, for example, when I talked to you, everything on roofing, with the exception of salaries, have gone up 30+%. And when they do a quote, they give you 15 days in that quote because it's so volatile, especially on the roofing projects. So that's kind of what we're running up against as well.
I mean, one of the things that we've talked about in our deliberations is we have a large chunk of money right now to spend. And we've thought about the strategy with that, because we also annually try to budget $125,000 in our annual budget for ongoing repair and maintenance and capital improvement, to try to chip away at that, deferred maintenance catch up that we've been doing. So there are projects, when we take that and we set a goal of having around 100,000 each year that we could take out of our capital reserve, to have around 225,000 each year to commit to capital improvement. So moving forward, we could handle projects of that scope in a given budget year. But projects that are beyond that, it would be hard for us to tackle those within a budget year unless we, decided to move more over from unassigned to help with a big project, or decided to add more, to the budget that would have a tax implication in a given year. So I guess what we were thinking with the roof project, when the three of us were talking in the last week since we got these numbers, is some of these, if we waited a year, we could tackle those, next year, talking maybe FY23, to do, if we did 3 at first and then did the last 3 the next year, you could handle that within your capital budget. But, doing more now knocks things off the list. It might be hard to put in an annual budget, like, some of these projects that I think the numbers are kind of old and they might end up costing more than what's on the sheet. The 3 that are in 3 figures right now with cost escalation will likely be larger than that from what I'm hearing now. So those are some of the things that we talked about and we're trying to weigh as we consider.
I mean, I may be remembering this wrong, but my memory is that CHA told us we had 160,000 roofs. And way back early in the process, we said, well, let's put 180 towards getting that process started. For full transparency, the ranking of the building committee was the building committee, but the going from 421K to 180K, that's really just Meredith and I talking. So I don't want to be clear, that's not coming out of the building committee because it's much newer than the building committees. But you bring a valid point up and you could maybe convince me, but my thought process behind it is not every roof issue that's identified is an emergency. So you have to be committed to the follow through. And I just think we have more for a couple of reasons. One of them is what Meredith was saying. We have these roof chunks that come in these 50 to 90K chunks. So that's doable out of the annual budget, but a 400K library renovation is not really doable out of the annual budget. That's more, we're going to have to set aside 75K a year for 5 years to get back to the library. So there's also a piece of political will calculation. I'm making a calculation that if we don't do the library now, it will be another 15 years before we do the library. But if we don't do the roofs, we are going to stick to our principle of doing the roofs in years 2, 3, and 4 to finish off the roofs. So that's my thought process. Not necessarily right or wrong. You're asking the right question at the right time. But that's my thought process is, it was never presented to us, these roofs all have to be done tomorrow. It was, you have a lot of deferred maintenance on the roofs. And so my thought process is let's start knocking that off, but let's also not give up on some of these projects that, really also strongly came out of the community process as priorities. We're sitting in one of my biggest priorities is the library. This space hasn't been touched since it was joint town high school library. I forget the town was over here and the high school was over here, or vice versa. Right, this is not an optimal space for a modern high school library with maker builder spaces and all sitting there stacked on a table. And anyway, there's a lot of room for improvement in the library. So that's my thought process, partly political will, a lot, the size of the chunks, that we should do the big chunks now and just keep that carry through on that commitment to the roofs as a deferred maintenance project over multiple years.
And any of the ones that, like you said, Brian, none of them are catastrophic at this point. Are they in poor condition? Yes. Are we going to lose a roof right off in the next year? Should. So that's, but also to speak on ACE a little bit too, we also included the fascia boards. So that wasn't included in the first projects. That was all included as well. They'll be scraped and painted. So you're getting a pretty good facelift for the money that we're getting. So I had the contractor figure that all in as well.
And presumably, just to check, since Meredith mentioned that the roof over the new auditorium is leaking, there would be, the roof over the library would be intact before renovating the library. I'm not trying to be asinine in my questions, but just to make sure that we don't fix something that is leaking.
The cafeteria.
The cafeteria.
Oh, cafeteria, sorry.
I did have, you might not have been able to read my shorthand here. There's one roof, the one that's roof C is the corridor that runs down in between the gym and the auditorium. So it's adjacent, but it's not on the auditorium. So I was referencing that. But yeah, the cafeteria here and kitchen And then the 2-story classroom wing, which is everything, on that end of the building down to our new addition, not the new addition, but down to that. Were the 2, I think, highest priorities. And
The library was next,
well, I think
library and/or gym. We
the
were-
gym or the library, we weren't sure.
Yeah.
And so that was some
Yeah,
deliberation.
and we thought we had a leak.
Yeah, we had a leak in the gym that
It's like,
day when we were having this conversation.
But they've
so-
taken care of it, so
Yeah.
we're good.
All right, you did say that, Bill, but it's maybe worth emphasizing is we have already paid the roofers to come in and do some patching, which hasn't happened in 15 years either to my, so
There has been some patching,
Some
just to be
patching.
fair, but I
Yeah.
think it was without, I don't think we had this roof assessment
Yeah.
to kind of guide the strategic plan for the roof long-term. But I do think one of the things that would be important to me is to do this roof before the renovation, or maybe
Same
along
summer.
with the renovation of this space. And we were imagining this renovation to actually be the summer of 23 for this space, because we think it's going to take some time to design and work with stakeholders to imagine, uses that we want to have considered in design. So I think that if we staggered out the roof and did, maybe more than 180, but 3 of the projects this first pass and save 3 of the projects for the next pass, maybe in a year or so, might be an approach to take on the roofs.
I'm certainly supportive of that. Especially given, these 4 projects that are on here, I'm not kind of deciding, I think we've all acknowledged, given, where that was in the list of priorities, that's here just because we thought we could do it much more cost effectively ourselves. This isn't like a leftover. The siding was one that early on we decided, okay, we can handle this ourselves and save a lot of money. So we set it aside, but it's not something that didn't make the cut, right? So I'm not going to even count that one, but these other 4, they're all long-standing desires, needs, requests. We've talked about getting central admin out of those portables, which are well beyond their lifespan, for a long time, and we just haven't been able to do it. We've talked about the need to and the desire to redo this space. We haven't been able to do it. We've talked about redoing our athletic complex, right? And we did part of it. We've got a brand new track and it's awesome. And we're going to host track meets, including, I believe, PDC. So we're hosting a championship competition, not the state level, but we're going to host track meets this year. Yet we're going to have people having to use porta potties and there's no concession area. We want to finish that off. Right. So, I think, and the
fact that ASA, we need
that
more space at
space.
ASA,
We need
and
that
we have a
space.
space that we need to renovate, so it's
Right.
usable. And so
So
it's a really high priority.
yeah, those things are all important. So I'd like to make sure that we can get those done. And if, cutting the roofs in half or even in thirds, as long as it's not going to result in, catastrophic failure, knowing that we can fund those out of the $200,000-ish that we put in for capital projects in the regular budget every year. That's something I'm supportive of.
and not to put too fine a point on it, Meredith kind of already said this, but as we're starting to get into talking to architects and prices, we already bumped up the concession stand in the library once recently, but the other 2, the central office and the ASA kitchen, are starting to look like those are maybe woefully low too. So I don't think even though this spreadsheet looks like it comes within about $50,000 of balancing out, we're going to get through all of this if we keep the roofs to 180. I think that's going to be pretty lucky. Another point to deferring construction is there's at least a chance that some of the supply chain stuff settles down. It's a chance it could get worse too, but I don't know, on one level, it's hard to imagine it getting much worse. It's pretty extreme right now. So there's at least a chance that some construction 2-3 years out from now will be cheaper again.
So, what I think I'm ready to say, this is what I recommend that you consider tonight, because further down the agenda, there are a couple of items that really need your approval. And actually a couple that probably should have been on here, but didn't.
Probably the roof and the siding should go
Yeah,
in
so
here
the
too.
siding project, we'd like to engage that contractor to get on the schedule for summer. The roof, I would like us to say, we're going to do the top 2 projects that are on this list, but wait until we have the ASA quote and assessment to consider if we do a third, this summer, and we'll come back to that next meeting. But go ahead and engage them on, the 2 top priorities for the OHS list. And then have you consider the 2 proposals we have for engineering services to help us get further with planning, to try to nail down these numbers with more specificity so that we can, we have to spend some money to have good numbers to make some decisions. And we have some proposals tonight from companies about that work that we're going to talk about a little later in the agenda. But I think it's really hard for us to make firm decisions about anything under, those last 4 until we have better numbers. And that's what the engineering proposals are about, to help us get some designs created and get us to the point of being able to do some cost estimation, to be able to come back and use that to set priorities for how we're proceeding. Because I think without that, it's hard to make these decisions. I mean, ideally, we would like to, our thought was, before we had the roof estimate, was we move forward with central office and ASA, try to do that right away and get started on that as soon as a contractor could be available after we got design work done. And that's work that could happen potentially next fall, because those spaces will be unoccupied and could be worked on during the school year. And the other 2 projects would probably require a longer term design process, because we haven't done any design work for the library yet. And the concession building's a brand new build with, underground utilities and lines and environmental studies that have to take place, or reference our environmental studies. So that's going to take a little longer, and we had imagined those would be at least a year out. So I think bottom line, if we got both of these companies working on developing some plans that could get us better cost estimates so that we could come back together and look at those and make decisions, would be helpful for the board to approve that course of action tonight. With the Carpenter and Associates proposal, I talked to them today, because when I got this bid, I was like, we can't, that's not what I had in mind for engineering work for those projects. And I talked with them today, and basically it's because of where they see these projects falling in terms of cost. And he and I talked about the fact that they could, for a couple $1,000s, really do some design work and get some cost estimates back to us so that we can have better numbers to be making decisions around. So whereas the full everything contract with them for those projects that they put on here was $98,000, I am not interested in us engaging $98,000 worth of work approved tonight. Really more maybe a not to exceed amount for them to get started and do some cost estimation and bring back to us. And then Haley Ward, I think, we can talk about that. It's a little less clear to me. Next steps with that group, but so that's kind of the big picture recommendation, that I think we need to engage both of these groups to get us some better numbers. And we chose both of these groups for different reasons for these 2 different projects. We can get into that if you want to know more, but we interviewed these companies and decided, rather than going with just one, we found merit in working with both of them for the different projects.
So I guess first question is I mean, you heard Meredith basically talking about committing to the siding and sunroof work and committing to doing some more design cost estimation work on the others. Anybody have a conceptual disagreement with that? Anybody think we need to revisit this list and put things that are not conceived on this list?
we go back to the gazebo idea for a second? I
You're
don't-
kidding me. That was just a random thing I
I
came
know.
up with.
Well, it's funny. No, I mean, it's a small thing, but like one of the things I've talked with people about over the last year since I've been here, but a project I would love to see, which is small, maybe has nothing to do with this, but is sort of a forest classroom and sort of forest kindergarten, forest, which it doesn't take a lot of infrastructure or building, but there's certain things that would happen. And I don't know, we are not ready to do that right now or anything, but that's just, yeah, that is one thing on my mind of a building project that I'd like to see that's small and something that could probably be done in a budget or something. Just want to put that. So the gazebo.
I mean, it's good to start getting that list out there. I mean,
Yeah.
I would hate to put this board approval before the input from the ASA staff. So
Yeah,
there's
no,
clearly
I
a
just-
process behind.
Yeah, but that is something that, yeah.
So if I have learned anything from doing this construction, you would be surprised at what stuff costs.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at a concession building, almost $300,000 for a concession building, really? But we see it time and time and time again. What you think you or I could do for $50,000 comes back at like $300,000 with all the permitting and everything else that goes into it
Yeah.
that you and I don't think of. It's crazy.
But I will say that we have talked about your idea quite a bit actually through COVID and considered doing that with really some of the relief money that we had. But found instead that we, because we had the big construction project going on and we learned a lot about the permitting process of the land around us and the complication of using certain pieces on our land for things like that. It's a time intensive process that we didn't really have capacity to take on at that point. But it's definitely of interest to us to have an outdoor classroom space in the district. We have some great, we do great makeshift outdoor classrooms already, but to have a space that's more formal, I think there's interest in that. I'm not sure that I feel like it goes here, but I think it's within our reach to have that either through, getting on the capital improvement list or seeking grant funding to help, because there certainly are grants to help with things like that already.
Yeah, I mean, my first instinct, Jake's comment, correct, but if it's truly just a roof without walls and things, well, we probably could fit that into our, annual budget. So maybe we don't have to have, as heavy a way to process about that, but it's good to kind of get it on the table. Does that feel like a satisfactory approach that the
Yeah, I think so.
conversation started? And it's not, we're going to assume the 400,000, but the 75,000 kind of thing that we could slip in the future.
Yeah, I mean, the two forest classrooms I've been involved with, one was literally tarps for the roof and the other was like a little yurt thing. But
Yeah.
I don't know if either of those work here, but just, yeah.
You'd be amazed, and this gets back to Jake's point about costs.
Yeah.
Putting up a yurt is actually going to involve the state fire marshal.
Yeah.
And significant amounts of planning
Yeah.
and infrastructure.
I can see that. So the
Schools.
tarps one.
It's amazing, I mean, there's good reasons. We don't want kids to get trapped in a school in
Yeah,
a
yeah.
fire, but the regulatory burden on a school is very different than if I put a
Sure.
new extension on the back of my house, so. And I'm not at all joking about putting a yurt up and the amount of involvement with the fire
No,
marshal,
I
so.
believe it. And I certainly understand the planning that needs to be involved with land use. We're nowhere near ready to do it, so I just.
So, I mean, yeah, good start the conversation. We are later in the spring going to get to a long-term, like a 5-year capital maintenance plan. So that seems like something that can go into that. So, other than that, everybody conceptually okay with the plan as presented? Should we just vote on these things now that it's fresh in our mind? I don't want to take too long. but-
Yeah, yes.
All right, so first thing is I'm going to make a motion to authorize the superintendent or designee to execute a contract with, what's the name of the company? Restorations Unlimited for ASA siding, not to exceed 190,000. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? Okay. I would further make a motion to authorize the superintendent or designee to execute a contract with Roof Systems of Maine to initiate the first 2 priority items. What was the total on that again? Is that the
$175,000.
not to exceed 180? Well, it's, since these are estimates, not to exceed 190,000, with the understanding additional discussions on roofs will come in before we commit other funds. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion or conversation? All those in favor? Okay, I would make an motion to authorize the superintendent to sign a design contract as presented with Haley Ward. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any
I would just
further?
like to say that I'm not sure I'm going to sign it as presented.
Okay,
Um,
let me retract that. I'll make a motion for the superintendent
We want to get through design.
to sign a design contract with Haley Ward, not to exceed. Well, let's just put the whole amount in, but that doesn't require you to spend it, not to exceed. Well, there's two contracts, aren't there?
There's one for
That's
each.
45 and
It's close to that. It's 34.
45 and 34, so that's 79. I would make a motion to authorize the superintendent to sign two contracts with Haley Ward to commence on design work not to exceed 85,000.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? And it sounds like the carpenter next step is going to be cheap enough. You don't need a board approval at this point.
That's
So
true. Yeah.
it's under 5,000, so.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically we just committed to do some work on the roofs, to have another conversation on the roofs, to do the ASA siding, to proceed with the design work on the concession building and the library, and to pay to get a better cost estimate for the ASA kitchen and the superintendent central office movement.
And I'll just say that for those last two, we have a little bit more of a floor plan idea already ready. So it's a little easier to kind of jump into, let's get some cost estimates from what we had laid out here. Whereas with the other two, we really don't. So we need to do a little bit more work to get to that point.
Also, I mean, with the architect's call program design, right, which is doing a needs analysis is kind of already done for those two spaces, and it's not for the two spaces that we did with Haley Ward. Okay, so that was long, but that gets us through capital improvements. On to a really short thing called the budget.
Do we need to take a short break before we dive into this?
Want a break?
I wouldn't mind a short break.
Yeah, maybe
All right,
5 minutes.
5-minute break.
We'll be back at 8:18.
Yep.
is the next item. I put updated documents in the folder today. They were just new versions of what I put in there on Friday. So it's the same sheet that we always start with. That's the picture of or the expenditures on the bottom, revenue on the top, and then a page that kind of goes into our deliberations around reductions. So one of the things that I would just point out on the cover page, which shows where we are right now with expected revenues compared to, requested expenditures. When last we met, that line that shows how much taxes would increase with the budget, the increase/decrease line that's about halfway down the page. When we last met, that number was 757,000 and some change. And, our newest figures in the most updated sheet that you have in your folder, that number is now at 681,000 and some change. So we did make some progress over, since we last met on enacting some or implementing into the budget some of the things we talked about, and then some new discoveries that we were able to incorporate into the budget. So I know, that's often the figure we're watching to try to manage the revenues versus expenditures and where we land. So just to kind of explain the second sheet that has more details, you can see that, but it's the second page in the budget document. So we've just organized this a little differently to help our thinking. In the left-hand column in red are items that we took from your feedback last meeting that we had the green light to go ahead and remove those items from the budget. So we ended up making those changes in the budget. That's what led us down to 681,000. One of the things that was new was the two resignations that we had. Whenever we have a resignation in time to impact budget, we consider where that employee fell relative to how we usually budget for unknown new hires. So sometimes it's we have to add money to the budget. Sometimes we are able to reduce the budget. So in this case, we were able to reduce by the amount you see there because of those two resignations and where we budget for new employees, which is basically master's level, 10 years experience with 2 adult insurance. It's kind of a medium level that we budget for that seems to balance out in the end if we budget that way. So that means we've taken out, since we last met, 79,962. On the right-hand column figures, you see the ones in black are the numbers that we've just presented to you as options to consider. And the ones that are, Lynn's on the call, so she can correct me. Do I see? Yes, there she is. Are the ones you see in bold print are new to the list, or at least new numbers in some cases. In other cases, they're new altogether with new ideas, thinking that has taken place. So I just want to kind of mention those to you. The first one there is special education transportation, and they had an idea for how we can realize some cost savings there to use our own vans and staff to do some of our special education transportation as opposed to hiring SEER to do a whole new, the little white minibus. And Lynn, Bill, Lisa Smith hatched this idea and feel like it's something we can definitely take on. And so that's a cost savings of 32,000. Because of a change in an out of district placement, we realized we could take out an ed tech position that was part of that out of district placement. So that's the 42,000 you see there. We talked last meeting about the power, the solar net energy credits. So we've put the 13,000 that we expect there. We do plan on moving that over to red as soon as we nail down our energy costs for next year. We want to make that change all at once. So the item above that is actually something we're going to talk about a little later in the agenda. Our energy costs up until December were under a contract with Constellation at a fixed rate, and that contract expired at a most unadvantageous time when energy rates were on the rise. So we have been talking with some companies about how we can get locked into a contract again, so we can control the volatility a little bit. And so what we are suggesting here is that we think that we can lower what we estimated into the budget based on some new learning we've had to an average of around 12 cents per kilowatt. So that would help us back down some of the increase that we built into the budget by 27,000. We had already built in a lot of escalation costs in this budget, but we think we could back off of that a little based on some new learning we did. So those are the new things you see in the reduction list column. The other thing that I would say is we, after having explored options and considered whether we had capacity to expand services with our existing social work staff, both the one from Northern Light and the HAP, we've decided that really any increased capacity would really not meet the need that we see emerging. And combined with the fact that private providers and providers outside of school just wait lists everywhere, and just people aren't able to take on clients, and there are wait lists for mental health services at every place people check. So we feel like that we need to leave this in the budget, and we wish for it no longer be considered as a reduction. And so we've removed it from the list for that reason. So what that leaves us with is, a set of reductions that we've offered as ideas for 263,000. Some of those are really easy, right? You've already accepted the solar. We know that's going to go in. It's pretty easy to say, yep, we'll take that energy savings if we can arrange that with Constellation. Some of these others you may have questions about, but that's where the work stands on the top of the sheet. On the bottom of the sheet, I just want to mention one other pretty important thing that has gone on this time of year. Usually after the month of March, we engage in a process where we're trying to forecast our end of year financial picture. It's definitely not a perfect science, and it's an estimation because unanticipated needs can come up and disrupt our projections quite a bit. But you see in blue over on the far right that we are projecting that we are going to use 384,000 from our unassigned balance at the end of this year. Now, considering we built 951,000 into our budget, and there's another couple numbers that are part of this picture, we're doing really well, because that includes the fact that we voted to approve to move 350 out of unassigned into capital reserve. So that takes that into account as well. So if you consider that piece, plus the fact that it gets a little tangled, and I apologize for saying all this out loud, I'm not giving you a linear path on some of this. We also voted to assign some expenditures from last fiscal year that we couldn't get them expended by June 30 into this fiscal year. And that was for 366,000. So all of those figures go into this calculation that in the end says we're spending 384,000 out of unassigned, when that number, according to our budget, could have been around $1 million, right? If we'd have spent everything that we said we were going to spend this year. So I think that accomplishes two things for us. One, it helps us begin to reduce that unassigned number in ways that support programming that we've been trying to figure out how we should do that best. And secondly, it I think means we're budgeting pretty close to where we need to be budgeting. When you take out those 350,000 and 366,000 and kind of consider those a wash, and the fact we bought laptops, there are just lots of things that went into how unassigned intersected with our budget this year. I think the fact that we're at 380.84 is really, a good way to end the year. And I think it gives us some information to use as we consider how we use unassigned in next year's budget. And that's mainly the reason we talk about it at this time. So you have at least a general idea, our best educated guess that we can make at this point, and Lynn hates doing this process. I mean, like with a vengeance, she hates doing this process because she's, has an accounting background, and accountants don't like to guess, right? They want to be very precise. But I think it helps you get a sense for, are we spending the million, or are we spending more on the scope of, 300,000 to 400,000 out of unassigned this year, to give you an idea of what that revenue source will look like in the coming year. Lynn, would you add anything to that?
To the projection number, you mean?
Anything I just said?
No, I think it does get a little bit confusing, but one thing that we haven't done in the past couple of years is support of that. We've kind of been not using plus adding in, and it definitely looks like this year that's not going to be the case. We're not going to use all of it, but we're definitely looking into it this year. It's not going to go untouched and added on from the projection right now.
The other thing I just want to point out, if you look at the very bottom row on the sheet, unassigned funds balance. So that 3 million and change figure was our audited July 1 or June 30 balance in our unassigned fund. So when you consider, that we think we're going to be using around 300,000 to 400,000 of that this year, that comes down to like, 2.6 million, if that's the case. And then the second number, this $1,083,063 is the number that if we used our unassigned in the way we laid out in this budget proposal, that's how much we would at a maximum be taking out of unassigned. Now that's assuming we expend our entire budget, which, this year we put 951,000 from unassigned in our revenue picture to help fund our budget. And, we're not spending anywhere close to that because of the way we budget. We've talked about this, that we have expenditures we don't end up making, and we have $200,000 worth of contingency each year. And Lynn and I were going back into the budget to, investigate why do we find ourselves where we find ourselves now. And it's just a lot of little things. It's, where we expected X number of students in out of district placements, and we don't have that many, we have less due to students transitioning to, other places. And that's a big price tag. And, just a myriad of other reasons why we don't expend our budget every year. And this year it's, a lot of little reasons. So that's the context of the new information that I want to make sure everyone had.
Yeah, this is a simple question as I'm learning about budgets. And so listening to what you say, I hear that it sounds like we need the 681,000, but maybe there's 343,000 that could be cut. Are those two sentences correct?
No. That's not the 384,000. The 384,000 is a projection of how we're going to end this current fiscal year.
No, I was going back a step.
Back on Kevin's, we're showing 681,000 for tax increase.
Right.
So that 79,962 is already rolled into that number, which is why it's not 7. So is that correct?
79,962. Where are you?
Looking at this red number right here.
That's what you've already said. Those are cuts you've already.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Yes,
Yeah,
so
I had
that's why it's not 700 something, it's 680, because that's 79. But if we followed all of the recommendations in the second column, that would take another 263
Yes.
off, which would, I was just doing that math, it would drop it down to
418,000 or so.
418, yeah,
Okay.
right. So,
So if you accepted the full column of recommendation for reduction, but we haven't done them yet, that $263,000 worth of ideas that we propose.
so that would take the
Tax increase down to 418,000.
418.
Not including insurance, which we don't yet know about, which we'll know by Friday, I think.
We
is the date.
budgeted 9, right?
We budgeted 9%.
It's worst case budget, so it could come down. by,
Each percentage less than that's around $17,000
yeah,
savings.
by 5 or even potentially 6 figures if it's a really good year.
And every year we budget in a way to end with a bit of a cushion ideally.
Yeah, that's
Has
where
there-
this,
Has there been a minimum year? Like, what's the worst case scenario in terms of our cushion?
so the balance forward is this undesignated fund. It's, sitting right around 3 million right now. And yes, because we'd have to go back to the voters if we want to spend more than our bottom expense line. We always, make sure there's a cushion in there. That cushion has traditionally been about 600,000 to 800,000 in terms of what we don't actually spend in a given year. And so what we do is we say, this is a little bit of it's not a fiction, it's an accounting thing. We say we're going to take 800,000 out of our fund. And then at the end of the year, we actually didn't spend 800,000. And so our fund doesn't change. That would be the kind of default case. In reality, oftentimes what happens is we say, well, we think our cushion's 800,000, so we'll say we're taking 800,000 out of our fund, expecting that not to really have an impact. But then we end up with a cushion of 850. So we added 50K to our fund. We have never, in my time on the board, which is I think 8 years now, done the opposite, where we said we think we have a cushion of 800,000, but we actually spent 750. I mean, we actually only had 750 left at the end of the year, so we took 50,000 out of the fund. We have literally every single, some years it's only been 20,000 off. Some years it's been several 100,000 off. I said there's lots of reasons, ESSER funds being a big one recently, but we've always ended up with more than our planned cushion, which is the amount we say we're going to take out of the designated. So yeah, I mean, that's the first piece is our cushion is basically, there's a line item, which is contingency, which is a fairly explicit cushion. And then there's also just a cushion that every line item, has a little bit of padding, which makes sense, right? Every principal puts a little padding in. And so the total cushion is on the order of 650, 800,000. And we typically just kind of match that 1-for-1 with what we say we're going to take out of the undesignated fund. And if that cushion estimate is accurate, that money is left over at the end of the year and goes back into the undesignated fund. And it's just like a circular door, no impact. The other thing we can do is we can take other money out of our undesignated fund that we target for a particular purpose, which is not really meant to match up 1-to-1 with the cushion. Like we did that last year with the multi-laptops, and we're proposing doing that here for several things like a truck, and some of these things in the second column are, let's just spend it out of one-time funds because it's a one-time cost. And those designated things we're taking out of the undesignated fund, we are expecting not to turn into the cushion, which goes back in, but to actually draw down the undesignated fund. And just a little bit of history on that, I pulled out the audit from FY18, so 4 years ago, we were at 2.2 million. So that 3 million in a historical sense it's up $800,000. And even, I don't know if you had a chance to pull older numbers. Okay.
It's really interesting, but there was a change in accounting practices midway through kind of the history I looked up that changed the picture somewhat, because they used to take the amount that you put in your budget for revenue out of what they said you had in your unassigned. So that 951 would be taken out of our audited amount in former practices, but then they stopped doing that. So it looks halfway down this list of historical unassigned balances, like there was a big shift one year, but that's what caused the shift. But it, at its lowest point, was 945,000 back when they took out the amount that you were putting back in your budget. And then grew over time. It really grew last year, was the biggest growth because of all the relief funds we had and COVID impact of normal kind of expenditure patterns and activity. So we grew by just under or around 800,000 last year. Because of that.
That was a huge jump. Yeah, my memory was something like 1.2 or 1.4. So since I got on the board before last year, we've kind of crept from 1.2 or 950 or whatever you said.
Yeah, but that was really why we did the 350,000 over to capital reserve, the earmarked money to help pay for the new laptop purchase, to help offset tax increases and bring down that capital reserve we got last year.
Although we didn't fully offset last year. Right?
No, not quite.
Right, so I mean, the net is in about 8 years, we've gone from 1.2 million to 3 million, you know, in designated fund. Personally, I thought 1.2 million was
It
too
wasn't
low.
1.2 really. 'Cause
Right, it wasn't really 1.2. So back then, when it was 1.2,
This is
the
one,
auditors took out the next year's carry forward in that bottom number.
which was about
So-
650,000, I think, at that time.
sounds about right.
It was
I
about
don't,
1.8 million, I guess, would be
yeah,
the accurate apples to apples comparison.
yeah, it was,
Yeah, I'd say, Kevin, to answer your question, I think if we can, depending on our goals for the year, like right now, our goal is to spend down unassigned a bit. But in a typical year, it would be to have it remain about neutral, that we don't add to it too much, and we're not, meaning we're not overtaxing. But we're also not relying on it, you know, to a great degree that's going to catch up with us after a few years.
And I would second that. It was, I think, too low initially, so we did build it up intentionally, but we reached a point, and then the goal was to really, you know, that year where we were only off by 20K was like the perfect year, in my opinion. The goal was really to just have the cushion and to have it come back and not be playing that game. But basically, COVID has completely messed up that plan. Instead of being at 1.8, we're up to 3 million at this point. So in my opinion, we're too high, and we should be spending, not just spending it down for 40K for a truck, but
But after this year, we'll be down at about 2.6 something.
2.6, yeah, with the 380
Which is still higher than we have been.
historically. I still feel like there's some more room to spend it down, whether we spend it down on one-time purchases, we spend it down on, you know, spreading the tax burden so it doesn't jump as much this year, recognizing we're gonna have to jump it again, you know, increase it next year. Or, you know, start putting it into capital reserves or other designated funds. Those
That
are
would
all.
probably be my preference if we were gonna do it, is knowing this, but you know, we've got these roofs coming up and putting some there.
Yeah.
And capital reserve, would be my preference for that. Kind of looking at the proposal, big picture that Meredith presents to us here. I'm more or less supportive of the package that's presented to us. I'm definitely supportive of leaving that social work piece in. I think that's absolutely critical to stay in. You know, so, but everything else I'm more or less supportive of. If somebody wanted to make the case to me, well, we don't need that truck this year. Okay, but it's a one-time purchase. It's not anything that's going forward every year. So I can look at that. So if we had to vote on this now, which we don't, but we're getting close to the point where we're gonna have to make decisions. I'm supportive of the package as presented. The one thing, and I think I'm probably in a minority in this, but the one thing I would like to revisit that's not on here at some point before we're done with this is the halftime principal position at ASA. But in terms of what's presented here, I can definitely support this.
When you
So
say,
just to give the big numbers, if we take everything that's in that right-hand column, which drops us down to 418, that would sound like a 3/4 mil increase, but actually 140K of that increase is increased property values, which traditionally we've focused on mill rate changes, not tax changes. Different people have different opinions about that. Certainly there are a lot of taxpayers who focus on tax changes and not mill rate changes. But if we take out the 140K and increase property values, it's down to 278K, which is about a $500,000 increase. It's change of $500,000 on mill rates. It's still 418K in taxes, but 140K of that is increased property value.
Which again, I would prefer to avoid that, but I mean, I don't see any way around it when we're coming off a year where inflation is at levels it hasn't been since the early 80s. I mean, I wish it wasn't that, but that's what it's been.
I did look, the state subsidy went up by 4%, but of course, inflation went up by 7%.
7.9 was the last.
A year ago, we thought that was a really generous increase in the subsidy when we first heard about it.
Which it was
but
at the time.
Compared to 2% inflation, it was, but that's why we ended up where we have is if you look at our expenses, it's 7%, which is 2% increase in enrollment and 7% inflation and state funding, because it was all set a year ago. is 4% increase. So, you know, there's a chance, I haven't heard any rumors that they're looking to put all this
That does not.
$1 billion give back. They're not putting it into the schools that I've
No,
heard.
that does, I wouldn't hold your breath on that. That's not even on the agenda.
Yeah. So I think we're the front line for the state funding not keeping up with inflation. But that's, if you take the increase in property values out, we're looking at about 207, assuming we leave everything exactly as is and take the whole second column, about $500,000 of increase.
So I just want to be clear. So when you say you support it as is, you're supporting, we're still going to spend the things in black, but we're just take out the things in, like still pay for the seats and the art teacher and the.
Well, I mean, not everything in black is, and some things aren't going to get spent. I mean, for example, the padded seats aren't going to be done. The ACE art teacher is recommended not for 22, 23. Some things will still be done. It's just they're going to be purchased from unassigned, not within the budget as per se. It's coming from that unassigned balance.
It's not in the operating.
Right. It's just, but none of those things are going to be purchased from unassigned or are ongoing expenses. They're all one-time expenses.
So just to recap on FTEs, which are the big impacts on budget, we did put back in the halftime social work FTE. We already have a tech assistant in the FTEs. We're returning, meaning decreasing, because it's not a change in the total budget, but when we had somebody step up to help with curriculum coordinator, we added two half FTEs to the high school, but those are reverting back into the main budget since we'll be hiring a separate curriculum coordinator. So that's kind of a wash or moving around of FTEs. We still have the auditorium manager half FTE. We have the choir going from 0.8 to 0.5, but ideally combined with the auditorium FTE to make a 1 FTE position. I'm trying to think of the other big change.
We have a custodian.
The custodian position being added in because we've got a lot of new floor space and square footage. And the assistant principal is currently not in these numbers. Is that correct? Or is it?
It's not in the reduction list that we put forward.
Meaning it is in the budget?
It is
It
in
is in
the
the
budget.
budget.
Okay. I mean, I personally feel like we've gone back and forth on the timing. I think you mentioned that last time. I was pretty sympathetic to that. But talking to Meredith, we're hiring the principal upfront enough that the principal could actually help to hire the assistant principal. And the assistant principal could help to make that a more sustainable job for the principal. So
And in turn, less work for Meredith to focus on other
Which-
things. What it co-
Well,
I mean, I did bring that up last time, but what it comes down to for me is since you've been here, we burned through 3 ACE principals, right? You'll be on your 4th with this next hire.
Not for all the same reasons.
for different reasons, but the last one that everybody, I don't know if I can say this, but the last one that left it, how should I say this? The last one that I know everybody was happy with, not including, well, that's not true. Can't even say that because the current one's leaving. Everybody's happy with her as far as I know too. The longest tenured one, right? Was clearly working 60 to 70 hours a week. We would drive by the parking lot and see her car there at 7 o'clock at night. So
It's been a consistent theme
Yeah,
that
it
you've
has.
it's a
heard from
consistent
all of us.
theme. Yeah.
It's, you know, the enrollment's just at the highest point it's been since I've been here.
And the reality is you can't spend your time onboarding a new principal every other year.
Well,
It chews up time.
I would rather make this about what the building needs, not what I need. It's really about what the
But-
building needs. And I just, there are, you know, so many needs to be attending in that building and really, you know, and talking with every principal that I've talked with there, it's just like putting out fires and attending to the highest tiered, you know, emergent needs. And to feel like you can have time to do the, you know, really important growth work in our schools, you just don't have time to get to those things.
I think you made a key point. The enrollment just keeps going up from 280 to 315 in just a few years. So I personally would be supportive of leaving the halftime principal in, but Mark, did you want to make a case in the other direction?
I would be supportive of taking it out. And then we possibly revisiting it next year, depending on what the numbers look like. But as I said, I believe I'm probably in the minority on that, but if it were up to me, I would.
Your thoughts?
Can I ask a clarifying question? Two. One's easy, I think. So it's the case that the auditorium manager, which is 0.5, and the choir position, which is 0.5, will likely be the same person. Is that the anticipation?
It's the hope.
The possibility?
I'd hope to advertise them simultaneous so that that could be a possibility if the right candidate applied.
We could even cross-reference the ads and each other, right?
Then the second question, how does it, I don't know how this works. So do we have a 0.5 FTE assistant principal? Presumably you don't find a highly qualified person who works 20 hours a week. Is it somebody in the building who takes on this role? It reduced other responsibilities? How does that work?
We would advertise it as a 0.5, and if someone in the building was interested in that, then they could apply and we would see how that worked for their position. It may be someone from outside though, who is interested in maybe not full-time work for whatever reason and is interested in, keeping involved in education or school leadership. All kinds of circumstances I can think of, but when I've seen this position other places, it's either usually someone who has dual roles in a building, like I've seen in other places, attached to like an instructional coach in a building. It's part-time instructional coach and part-time assistant principal. And I've seen in other places that's just part-time, and sometimes it's someone who maybe was looking for a scale back to that level of time commitment, or someone who's maybe coming back from retirement, or just different circumstances. So, I mean, can we find the right person? I don't know, but I'd like to try, right?
Sure.
I mean, I think there are lots of possibilities of who that person might be and how it might fit together.
Can I ask, it's back, so there was a reduction of the music staff from ASA, the part of it that was going to ASA, is that's this, right, from what we were talking about last time? I guess I'd heard that over there that the music staff wasn't sure how they were gonna handle that, like that wasn't something they were supportive of, and I didn't know if that was true or like where that sits and everything.
So some history on that position.
Yeah, I know we talked.
For 29 years, Orno had a 0.5 choral teacher. We shared that position with BZ. 0.5 Orno, 0.5 in BZ. In 2017, BZ said, we're not going to share anymore. We need to restructure. And so that person didn't have the position in BZ. So there was advocacy to make it full-time here. We want to keep this well-qualified person. There are all these things we can do. So the board at that time decided to move it to 0.8. And at that point, the administration really didn't see the justification for that, but the board wanted to try it. We've tried it. And in looking at the schedule, we really see that the 0.5 seems to be the right level of need to fill what's emerged as the need at the middle and high school. And in talking with Kristen, we see a way to make the music offerings workable for the ASA students and with the choral 4th, 5th grade course that ASA usually has. One of the things that helped us at ASA to be able to open up our schedule a little bit was not having the cafeteria be the gymnasium. And so it really helped our special schedule have a little more flexibility in it to be able to run specials throughout the day more. So I think we have more flexibility with our schedule than we've ever had. So in just talking with Kristen, there's a way that she sees to make it work.
So is the music staff at ASA on board? Like they feel like they don't need that extra help? I guess that's.
I'd have to have Jess here saying that, and I'm not going to put anyone on the spot with that.
Yeah.
But as far as we know, the amount of.
I think the staff had a question about how could we do this, one piece, and Kristen looked at the schedule and said, well, this is how we could do that. It works. So, I mean.
As far as we know, the amount of instruction for kids in choir is not going down at ASA, right?
I don't believe so. I think Kristen had to step away. But no, I think there was a way. Oh, there's Kristen. Hello. Sorry, I didn't have my Zoom screen on. I think there's a way to think the only thing in question was the fourth, fifth grade course. Is that right? And
Yes,
so
that's correct. Yeah.
the time difference, there's a time difference with with the idea for next year.
That's correct. We'd be using the same schedule we're using currently, but the offering would be at a different time. Hope maybe within the WIN block. I want to get together with the staff to look more at that. So
Yeah, I guess it sounds like it hasn't yet been figured out how that's gonna be covered with the staff. I guess my impression last week was that I guess I was trying to understand how what this is doing to the staff and to their ability to cover music. Because my impression last week was that they were supportive of this, and then I heard that maybe they weren't, and so I'm just confused.
So at ASA, we have one PE teacher that covers the entire school population. We have one librarian that covers the special schedule. We have 0.83 art teacher that covers the entire population of specials. And then, for 29 years, we had one music teacher, and then we had 1 plus 0.3 when we had this extra 3 that we were trying to figure out how to use that time. Because to be frank, the administration didn't feel the need for that time, and we didn't see how that really worked within the schedule. So we redid the schedule a bit, and it didn't always work perfectly to have someone else incorporating into that music schedule. And so I think
what we
that
as a board did in that particular instance is we overruled the administration because we were interested in keeping a person that had been here for a long time, but that had now had a different circumstance because of the collapse of a partnership with another district, right? It wasn't to fill an existing need, right? And the administration at the time was clear that this is not a need. And it was one of those instances where the board, not that we disagreed that there was a need, it was the desire was to keep the person. And that's why
That person is now retiring.
that person is now retiring.
I mean,
That's
Brian
why
and
that
Mark,
decision was made.
correct me if I'm wrong, we added 0.3 to keep someone from going somewhere else.
That's right. The worry was if it dropped to halftime, they
Yes.
would leave the district
And
altogether.
that's the only reason. we did
So for
that.
29 years prior to that, it was 0.5 and it was fine.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I understand that it was in one place in the past. I guess I don't know that that's where it needs to be in the future. I guess I would just want to know where, I would want to know how the music staff feels about it. That's me, so. Yeah, so.
well, Kristen spoke with the music staff, and that was the feedback, that questioning where we could put the chorus time. And so, Kristen feels like the WIN block could be an idea, but really wants to collaborate with staff on the best way to organize that. The WIN block is kind of a new structure that we were trying to put into place this year, but the timing wasn't right with the year that, the continued year of COVID. But there's a plan to incorporate it next year into the schedule.
What's the WIN block?
Kristen, I'm gonna let you, what I need, right?
that's correct. What I need. And it basically is what each student needs.
So it's a lot of different offerings that students can take advantage of. Some of it RTI, some of it enrichment, I'm assuming.
Yes, that's correct.
I guess I'll follow up. So the point was made that the ASA has a one person for gym and one person for music and so on, and 0.83 for art. So just to kind of revisit a point that Noah had brought up last time. So how is it just functionally that there's less than 1 FTE for art, but there needs to be 1.0 FTE for gym and the other things? Programming wise, how did that happen? Why does it persist?
Well, I think that one of the reasons that it was that way, there were some other things that some of the other specialists were doing aside from teaching specials. Like the librarian was, maintaining the library collection and hosting some different program features rather than just the special schedule. And similarly, the music teacher was doing some other instruction, like the choral group that was a addition to the special schedule. I don't know the specifics about what each person is doing, but the art teacher, I think, didn't have that kind of role assigned to that person. I don't really know why it ever started that way. I really couldn't tell history. I don't know enough history to know why it ever started that way. It's been that way for a long time.
Was some of the preference of the person in the position?
I want to say it was, but I'm just not certain.
That's, there was family circumstances that required it. Change.
So there was an additional instructional responsibility outside of the, teaching the special rotation schedule. And in fact, it was kind of customized to make sure this person was able to reduce schedule by that amount. So we've maintained that. I'm not sure what instruction we would add. I mean, the reason it was given to me to consider it was so that they could hang art around the school. And I inquired, how are we doing that now? And parent volunteers are doing that. And I said, that sounds like a great use of volunteers. So I'd like to hear, some other reason why we're expanding a position, perhaps than that one that was articulated at the time.
So this again, the 8,000 extra for the art teacher. And I mean, I just say again, I really want to see that in. And
So let me propose this as a path forward. We are kind of at decision time. We basically at our next board meeting on the 26th is our very last chance to change anything in the budget. The only thing that we'll have an update on is the insurance, which could help our position. But it takes a lot of time to go back and implement these changes through all the spreadsheets. So we're trying to limit the scope of changes now. So at some point, I would recommend, I've heard 3 positions where it doesn't sound like we're at unanimous consensus, which would be the ASA halftime position, the choir position, and the ASA art. So we don't normally as a board take binding votes on individual positions, but we do sometimes take straw poll. So since we don't have a clear consensus, I guess my recommendation is we do a straw poll on those 3 positions from the board. But whether we want to do that tonight or whether we want to do that at the next board meeting, do you have an opinion on how much you want us to finalize things down? I mean, I bet I could tell you how all these votes are going to come out.
Well, I mean, I think, yeah, we need to finalize by next meeting. So I think it's good to hear perspectives, to know where we differ at this point. I'm not sure we need to vote until next meeting, but if there's something that would help us refine information to bring back to you, that would be instructive at this point.
Maybe
For
everybody
example,
could just state where they are on those 3 positions. I'll
So halftime principal at ASA or assistant principal, 0.83 versus 1.0 art teacher, and 0.8 versus, well, I don't know, 0.8 or 1 versus 0.5 choir.
and I just got some additional information from someone who's the historian of ASA for me. And it's there were other duties assigned to the other 3 positions other than art. And that's why the other positions were, larger time positions. And art used to be 0.5, and then it was added to over the years as the special schedule emerged, to have greater need. So
Mark, you were volunteering to just.
Sure, I'll go first. I'm opposed to adding the halftime principal at ASA. I'm in favor of keeping art at 0.83 at ASA, and I'm in favor of reducing the choral position back down to 0.5.
For the sake of simplicity, I am in favor of adding the halftime assistant principal at ASA, keeping art at 0.83 and choir at 0.5.
I can go. Based on the explanation, I can support the 0.83 now, but I would like to imagine that maybe the art teacher at some point gets to explore, imagine what a full-time position could look like. They may have different circumstances, but I can see how it's explained now. And similarly for the choir position, I can see the justification for returning it to 0.5. But I would be in support of adding the halftime assistant principal.
No,
Well, I definitely am in support of the art at 1.0. Sounds like I'm the only one on that
so far.
page. I would, on the assistant principal, I suppose I could go. I mean, I would definitely be supportive of it. If I had to choose just one or the other, I would choose art. So at 1.0, and I would be willing to go with assistant principal, not for now, but so it's a juggling act for me. I mean, I would fund leads. If it were up to me, I'd support funding all of them at full amounts. And if there's a contention and something we need to do to trade to sort of like budget to where we want to be, I would be willing to go down on any one of those other things in order to keep art at 1. So that's.
Okay, and I guess, yeah, I support the halftime assistant principal. Always open to new information, but I support the, and I guess I've heard both of these conversations in multiple years, so I'm not necessarily expecting new information, but always keep an open mind. I support the ASA art at 0.83, and I support the choir position at 0.5. So, there's individual variation, but so far I'm hearing majority support for each of the budget recommendations as they stand right now. But we don't have to finalize things. So probably the most useful thing, other than kind of giving the administration a sense of where we're headed, which we just did, is if there's any specific request for information they can bring on the 26th. Otherwise, we will have to commit once and for all on the 26th.
We'll have insurance numbers by the 26th.
Right, I'll email the board when I learn of those, with a, general idea of what the savings will be, but Sue will go through and do the actual adjustments to give us an exact figure for a final budget vote. But we expect to hear by Friday, and they have never been late, so sometimes early.
Everybody good with that process? Anything want to add anything or ask any information? Just to be clear, nothing's set in stone, but we're letting Lynn start to get her documents in a final state and spend time on getting those cleaned up and, finalized instead of just rough back of the envelope things.
I feel like I should say one other thing, Lynn, that when I looked at you, it made me think about when he said, Lynn, get her final documents together. Lynn was looking at tuition revenue for like the 20th time today. And I think there's a little concern that our adjustment up maybe went a touch too far as guidance is going out and talking with some of the students at sending schools. We're not getting solid commitments from people who turned in paperwork earlier. So we might bring back a recommendation next meeting that we need to adjust down that tuition revenue a little bit, not a huge amount, but we just are waiting to see how things shape up. In that case, you'll have to consider what that does to the picture. And if you want to increase unassigned to offset that, that might be a potential option for us to consider if we do end up needing to adjust down our tuition revenue based on, the best information we have by next meeting. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yeah. And so just to be transparent, the board will vote on the budget in the April meeting. At this point, I guess, other than maybe the tuition and the insurance number, we're not having driven a change for the administration. So maybe it'll look the same as this budget, but we'll get it, except for those two numbers of tuition and insurance, we'll get a budget back. We will take a formal vote on the record next time. And that is instructing the administration to prepare the official budget, which will come back to us. And that will be a super official budget with warrant articles, which are legal documents that are calling the public to an election on this topic, which we will all have to sign. That then goes to an annual meeting where anybody in the town who wants to come can come, and they can vote to change the budget or not change the budget. They have to approve the budget as the end result as they vote to approve a budget, which then goes to a ballot in June for the public. So that's the full process, but it may seem like we vote on the budget like 6 times, and we kind of do as a board, but this is the time of, make your last big changes. Next time will be make your last changes, period. The board's instructing that this is the board's budget set in stone. Next one will be saying, yes, we agree, this is the budget we're sending to the voters. And then the voters will have a say in a in-face meeting, person-to-person meeting, and then whatever comes out of that goes to the full, goes to a ballot. So that's the full process. So I don't, maybe we should start talking up the date. What's the date for the
I
budget?
think it's May 26th. Is that right, Len? May 24th. Tuesday, May 24th.
Tuesday, May 24th.
Hopefully in the new auditorium.
Yes, yep. So just to start putting that on people's calendars, Tuesday, May 24th in the new school auditorium is the annual budget meeting, the in-person budget meeting. So
Anybody reached out to Dave Chase?
yeah, we should start getting the moderator.
Line him up if
Hear
possible.
that? Reach out to Dave Chase.
So, you know, everybody who's an Orono citizen is invited and welcome, and we should start publicizing that May 24th in the new Orono auditorium.
I was gonna say, don't drink.
Yeah. Okay, last call for anything on budget. Staff nominations. We have a slate of co-curriculars. Again, these are positions that exist. We're just approving the annual appointment of people to these positions. So I would make a motion to approve the slate of co-curriculars as presented. Is there a second?
I'll second.
And just for public information, that includes 2 OHS positions, JV softball, Alyssa Kubesh, and softball assistant Todd Hillier. Any questions, comments? All those in favor of the slate as presented? Next up, we already did the architecture and engineering contracts, the auditorium manager job description and MOU. So, you know, we've already talked about this in the budget context, but there's a halftime auditorium manager. Just since I got some queries from the public today, the process behind the halftime is, Mark knows, probably got those queries too. The process we've gone through is we've done two things. One is we made a big spreadsheet of all the activities we anticipate going on in the auditorium. And a lot of people probably have in their mind, well, there's show choir and the fall musical, but there's actually an enormous number of educational and as well as administrative meetings, everything from the, you know, staff kickoff meeting in August to the annual budget meeting, the band concert, all the things that are in Hoke and Minsk right now are going to be pulled back into our own building. You know, some of the professional development days. There were, I want to say there were 50, 60 things on that spreadsheet. It's a much, this is not just a performing arts center. I mean, we're calling it a performing arts center, but there's an enormous amount of educational and administrative uses for that facility as well. I imagine they're only going to grow once the town starts to think about this too. So there was a fairly full-blown needs assessment. We also have done a survey of neighboring school districts that have an auditorium and the amount of FTEs and time they put into managing that. Some of them are getting away with a 10-hour stipend, but most of the feedback we got is a halftime FTE is the right level.
What does Hamden have?
They do not have, it's stipended, and the feedback is
That's
it's
gotta
not
be a
good.
nightmare because that's busy
It's
there.
not good.
Yeah. And, you know, just to make one point, some of the equipment in that auditorium costs more than a half FTE. So this is, I think, a classic case of you put the money into something, you protect and maintain the investment. So that's my position on it, but that's the context. So the board has to approve job descriptions, and because this job was not anticipated the last time we signed the EPS contract, there's also a memorandum of understanding that's modifying the or adding to the EPS contract. So I guess first I would make a motion to approve the job description for auditorium manager as presented. Is there a second? Any conversation or feedback?
This is an area of expertise I do not have, and so I sought out really more expert information to help craft this. We looked at lots of samples from existing job descriptions and then kind of shape that into what we thought our facility and use needs would be supported by. And then an internal team of those who would likely be using it most helped look at it and just make some final recommendations and edits. So I feel like this is a good starting point, but we'll likely learn right away something we didn't anticipate and need to adjust, but I think that's part of the new position.
Can I just, outside of the description, I assume as far as the MOU goes, the compensation is you looked at what other districts are paying, or how'd you come up with that?
Yeah, it's all over the place, how people handle it. But we considered the types of activities they were doing, and it really fell under the ESP contract. And so we looked at the kind of technical expertise that would be required would be similar to the kind of technical expertise we want in our tech assistant at a minimum. And so that's where we put it to be on par with that level of pay.
Okay, so we have a motion for the job description. I think you seconded it, Mark. So any further discussion on the job description? I mean, we heard it's a work in progress, but we got to put something on the table. So all those in favor of the job description? Okay, next up, we have an MOU. I would make a motion to approve the MOU between the Orono Education Association and RSU 26 Board of Directors pertaining to adding the auditorium manager position to. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion or questions? All those in favor? Okay, so we can now hire that. That's that. Next up, we have the calendar. We've discussed this several times, but anything you want to add on that, Meredith? But I think we're at the approval point.
Yeah, I think we're ready to take a vote on this tonight. The only outstanding thing from last meeting that I wanted to check on, I've looked into, it was the coordination with UTC and us moving a day for a workshop day that's actually a comp day, a trade out day for teacher conferences from November 22nd to December 21st. And I wanted to make sure that wasn't going to be a problem with our regional calendar requirements with UTC. Basically, it is, but it's not exacerbating the problem too far beyond it's already a problem. And we're just going to go into next year knowing that we're out of alignment in our region. And they were actually, UTC was actually interested in us doing this to try it out so we could report back to the region if we like this model, because a number of regions do what we had done of having the one day of school the week of Thanksgiving. And I think there's some good reasons to consider doing it the way we're doing it next year. And we'll just report back. We may have to trade this back in negotiations next year around regional calendar, but they were fine with us doing it this year. That was a long way to say I checked with UTC and it's fine. I just wanted you to have that
Fine, but
context.
subject to renegotiation
Right.
next year.
I bet you other places will like it. The one day of school on Thanksgiving week is bizarre.
And we always hear about wanting a longer holiday break, winter break. So,
Can I ask you two other questions about this, Meredith? Did we, so what does that change mean for parent teacher conferences at ACE? I know wasn't that half day used, or so how are they just gonna go evenings both of those days?
Yeah, when Kristen and I looked at this, one of the things we talked about was that ASA teachers would probably use the 9th and the 10th for parent conferences,
So they're gonna go a little earlier.
right?
Okay.
That she thought that would actually work well at the end of the first trimester, and that it would allow 2 back-to-back conference nights. And then there's the 11th, which is a holiday, which is the respite from 2 long evenings. So
Right, okay. Makes
she
sense.
felt like that would be a good plan for using those days.
That sounds good. And then my other question is, did we go to 5 snow days or at some point?
This year we had 5.
We had 5 in the calendar?
This year there were 5 in the calendar. There are 5 in the calendar this current year.
And how many have we used?
3.
So we're proposing to go back to 4.
Yes. We are, but it's just a guess, right? I was trying to have us not be in school on Juneteenth because that brings up new holiday
Right, yeah, that's a
implications.
problem.
But it's still just a gamble because we don't know
Right.
what's gonna happen with weather.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure my memory was correct. I thought we had went to 5.
Yeah.
To any good New Englander, we just cursed ourselves to a snowy winter
Right.
next year.
Better skiing.
Yeah.
Any other?
Thank you.
So I would make a motion to adopt the calendar as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Any other discussion or questions? All right, all those in favor? Opposed? Okay. Next up was the added item, which is the main Power Solutions fixed price contract.
We were in a contract with Constellation for many years, actually. I think back since maybe 2014 or 13, around the beginning of the RSU years, or the new RSU with just Orno. And it expired in December. We were under a town contract and the town renegotiated, and we didn't know that that was expiring. And so we've since learned that we can enter into a contract, but what we really learned is that it's a bad time to enter into a contract. And so what was recommended to us, we checked two options, Constellation, and then we learned of this main power options. That's really a kind of a nonprofit to help government municipal entities with, power contracts, and they go out to bid and get, more advantageous contracts that entities like school districts can enter into. So they found this contract with us that we could do with Constellation. That's a 6-month contract that they're recommending to clients right now to just get through maybe this surge and then reevaluate after 6 months. And it gets us to an 8 cents per kilowatt for the next 6 months. If you look on page 10, there are 4 options there, and we would be opting for option D, which is the 6-month 8.9 cents per kilowatt. And then evaluate then where we go next. We built an average of 12 into the contract. We're hoping we don't need 12 or into the budget. We're hoping that when we go back out, in October to check on where things are in preparation for this November contract to expire, that the picture will be a little bit better. Right now, I think we could get, well, you can see if we went with a 3-year contract, it would be 11.5 cents a kilowatt. Which on the market right now isn't terrible, given that the rate we're being charged right now is 12, but we would, like to see if things don't before we lock in at that higher rate. So that's the recommendation.
What were we paying in our old contract?
Lynn, look this up. Wasn't it 8.2, Lynn? I think it was low 8s.
So all things considered, this is pretty darn good.
It is for,
Yeah, you're right. It was 8.2.
I mean, it just means we're taking on most of the risk of the upside on prices,
Yes,
which I agree with, but we should just state that clearly. You never know. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. I know the last time we bought transportation, we did a pre-buy on the fuel, and fuel prices went up a lot, and we won out of that. We let them take the upside risk on prices, and we won out of that. But I guess my intuition is the same as what was recommended, which is we should go with a short-term contract and see where things end up, especially given that that's a 2.5 cents is a pretty big price to eliminate the risk.
And our attorney has reviewed this contract and says that it's, what you would expect to see. It doesn't see any issue with the contract terms. And commented that she is seeing a number of clients take the 6-month option right now.
Works for me.
So I would make a motion to authorize the superintendent to execute a contract with Constellation as presented with the 6-month option. Was that seconded?
Yes.
Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor? Okay. Believe it or not, we're 2 subcommittee reports, and our audience is dwindling, but I don't blame them. Policy subcommittee, we met earlier this week. We mostly dealt with yesterday. Gosh, that feels like it feels like 4 days ago, but yes, you're correct. Yeah, we dealt with policy IKF, which is graduation requirements, and policy, I believe it was IKEB, which is middle schoolers taking credit classes for high school credit, and mostly tweaking those policies based on long discussions in the staff arena on those. And in particular with the graduation, really just kind of expanding the options for students to find pathways to graduation. and expanding a third type of ways that middle schoolers could take for classes for high school credit. So, and we also have an older policy that we just updated typos out of our update on promotion and advancement, basically moving to the next grade. So those will all be coming at the next board meeting on the 26th. And we're back into policy review. I don't know, we may not quite make it through this year like I thought we were going to, but we're pretty close. That's the policy subcommittee UTC. Probably, yeah, nothing happened.
Have we turned in new names to UTC? I bet we haven't done that.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you wouldn't even have gotten an email if there was a meeting, but there probably wasn't.
Yeah.
Spruce,
Nothing since our last meeting, which I reported on at our last board meeting.
curriculum subcommittee is coming up a week from Thursday. Facilities, you've heard a lot on the facilities, but basically we met before the last board meeting. We told you all of this self-managed stuff is going to come forward, and you're seeing the self-managed stuff come forward. I'm not sure. And we had a meeting with the architect this morning. Auditorium is getting close. It needs a final inspection by out-of-state experts, which we're trying to get scheduled, but it's getting quite close.
Why do they have to be United States?
Because there's no,
Theater consultants.
yeah, no in-state
Boston.
expert
We
in
don't have any.
theater curtains or theater sound systems or theater lights. Lights and sound are the big things. So they're coming up from Boston, and I think the curtain people come from Minnesota or something like that. Ohio. Yeah.
See, Noah, you imagine what we're paying for that?
Well, in fairness, we had conversations today about making sure the contractors really had done their work before they came, so we don't have to pay twice. But yeah, so, and we're on top of the big outstanding, other than the auditorium, big outstanding issues include the ponds, which are still waiting for the ground a little bit. Some HVAC stuff going on in the new band choir classrooms and the kitchens. And the benches and the backing on the benches in the high school cafeteria.
And ASA, the walls at ASA.
And at ASA.
And some larger landscaping issues beyond just the ponds.
And the seating on the ponds as well. Yeah, those are the big there's punch lists, so there's dozens and dozens of things that are going to get handed over. But we're pretty close to substantial completion, which is the big flip point from the contractor is on our dime to you guys have to finish up the list of things that aren't up to spec. So we're pretty close to substantial completion, and not going through the whole punch list, but the things I've heard from the community, those are the big things that are still on the list that we're keeping track of. Anything else that you would add? DI had one meeting. This is the action plan team. One meeting, I think maybe since the last board meeting.
Thursday.
And we're meeting again this Thursday. So, and at this meeting, last one was mostly introductions and meeting the team and everybody getting their head around the goal. And we're really going to start digging into the nuts and bolts of trying to get an action plan done before the school year is out. Anything else on that?
Have we sent you a report? Okay, great.
Oh, wait,
The report.
I don't know if I get the report. I know there's a meeting coming up.
Okay, I'll make sure that we send you the
You
report.
probably got the report as a board member, maybe not.
Yeah, 'cause that was before.
Any requests for other business? Any requests for future agenda items? Any requests for information? Especially if it's budget. This is literally your last meeting to ask for any information on the budget. Okay,
Not that I expect anyone to take advantage, but we are missing a second public comment.
oh yeah, we are. Anybody want
Well,
to?
the wellness has also disappeared.
And
Not
so
that I
has,
expect anything on that.
Next
either.
future
A
meeting.
future meeting, yeah.
Oh, it's on the next page.
No?
But I think.
Some stuff
Looks
must have
like,
got cut
looks
off.
like a couple things got cut
We're
off.
missing
Oh, I have
12
it on
and
mine.
12 and 13.
I go from 11 to 14.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's on mine. I don't know what. about me. No idea.
So any public comment?
It's a well-placed public comment.
Yeah, all we have is administrators who want to go to bed for good reason. Okay, next up. Is that- Yeah, I'm exaggerating, but not by much. Next board meeting is 3 weeks from today, 6 PM in the library and on Zoom. I would motion to adjourn. Is there a second? Any discussion? All those in favor? Okay, shorter than last time. That's all I can say, but 3.5 hours, shorter than last time. Thank you, everybody.